Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to the 16th National Government Ethics Summit. My name is Ryan Segrist. I'm joined by Liz Horton from the Office of Government Ethics, and we are very pleased to be discussing with you just a little bit some of the afternoon sessions. What do we have on tap for this afternoon, Liz?
So on tap for this afternoon here in the mainstream room, we'll be having a practical look at 5 C.F.R. 2635-502. So that's a good one. And then also in our live stream too, we'll have enterprise risk management that'll be moderated by our own Patrick Shepard.
That's right. That's why you don't see him right here. He is frantically preparing for that presentation as we speak. You know, enterprise risk management isn't something that you see come up an awful lot when we talk about ethics programs and the way that they're managed. Why is this such an important issue, and why is this coming up now?
I think it's important because anytime you can mitigate risk, clearly you can't always get rid of all risk, but anything you can do to try and mitigate it will help, at any time, but especially during the transition time, which is, such a dicey period of time. So anything you can do to minimize any risk during that time especially would be great.
That's right. One of the things that many transitions fall prey to is waiting till the last minute to try and get anything done. And that's not just transition teams, but also its agencies. And, as our panelists said earlier this morning, we need to be starting to prepare for the next presidential transition now. And enterprise risk management is an important way that we can strategically plan for those risks that are going to pop up during the transition at a time when the United States is the most vulnerable with all of its leadership positions empty.
Well, we've all heard that saying, fail to plan, you plan to fail. So
that's right.
This definitely goes a long way in making sure that you have that plan in place to minimize any potential adversities or problems that can come up.
That's right. So what are some ways that, besides watching Patrick's session, what are some ways that ethics officials can kind of get to know enterprise risk management?
I think what he may be touching on is training is definitely one way that can be done, where you prepare people for specific situations, or have practical situations where you say maybe this may be something that may come up. That way, when they are faced with that situation, they're better prepared to deal with it because they recognize it and they're not taken aback by it or a deer in the headlights.
That's right. One of our core functions as ethics officials is to make sure that all of our employees are trained, but even more so to make sure that our leadership is trained and make sure that they know what ethical standards they're subject to. And enterprise risk management is a way of sort of stepping back, looking at the situation from 40,000 feet and seeing, okay, these are the potential situations that may come up in our agency. How can we plan for them now? What sort of training do we need to do rather than just doing training for its own sake? What kind of training is most applicable towards this particular appointee or this particular office or this particular business unit? And it's a very powerful tool in that it allows us to sort of get a gigantic map view of where all of our risks lie.
Exactly. And I think clearly in any training situation, you'll never come up with every single scenario that can come up. But I think the more prepared you are, the more exposure you have to potential situations, the more emboldened you feel and more prepared you feel to be able to handle a situation that may be novel or something that you didn't exactly anticipate. But because you've prepared and had an opportunity to run through some different scenarios, that can definitely help in the long run.
That's right. By planning it out and gaming out all of your different potential risks, you actually are able to introduce a degree of flexibility to your planning as well, because you've already thought about all of the potential ways that something could go wrong or it could go right, because enterprise risk management also encompasses opportunities, not just potential risks. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to cut away for just a moment. We have an interview with one of the presenters from our 502 session, and I'd like to get some time to be able to talk with her about her session. Hi, thanks for hanging with us for that break. I would like to introduce Tina Heimer, who is going to be giving a presentation on 5 CFR 2635.502. I'd like to take a moment just to welcome you and to thank you for coming to our booth to do an interview. How are you doing today?
Good, thank you. Thanks for having me. I appreciate being here.
Great. So how do you like the summit so far?
I think it's really interesting. It's a great opportunity to, one, just to get to see everybody in the ethics community, receive some updates about what's going on as well in the ethics community, but also, too, this is an important year with transition coming up upon us, and there's a lot of good information to be learned and practices to hear from other agencies as we move forward.
So your session is going to be on 502, as Ryan mentioned. What is the one thing that you would like people to come away with after they attend your session?
Well, that nothing is ever crystal clear is what you'll probably gather from today's session. We're going to force people into making decisions, though, about whether or not they think a specific scenario is an issue under 502 or not an issue. But I think that the takeaway is that it's never an easy decision, and a lot of analysis is needed in those types of issues. And there's also some things where maybe it's not a problem under 502, but there's still optics concerns and impartiality concerns regarding a personal relationship. And so I will leave it at that so that I will entice, hopefully, people to come later this afternoon and participate in the fun, which will be right here in the auditorium.
Yeah.
So what do you think you had mentioned that, there's situations that you get into where you have to make a decision where, it's difficult to tell whether it's prohibited under 502 or not, and whether or not it may be okay under 502, but it may also pose some sort of strategic risk or an appearance risk, bad optics, so to speak.
Right.
What is it that makes that so difficult, if it's not going to take away from your presentation too much?
Well, I think that some of the things that you're going to hear us talking about are that these are hard decisions, and sometimes it's not legally, it's not an issue. We have a little saying in our office, legal but stupid, and so I had to think about that for a minute. But no, it is true, because something might be legal, but when you actually dig down and learn about the facts of a situation, there's a tremendous amount of risk associated with somebody continuing to participate in a certain matter, knowing that they have this relationship, or knowing about the extent of the importance of what it is that's in front of them to a particular agency. And so engaging management early in the process is really, you're going to hear us talking about that, is really important to making sure that as many people as possible know. And then, it's also about calculating the risk as well.
Would you say that's very important in this time, because there have been several articles about the public's perception and how they don't feel that the government is necessarily trustworthy? So would you say that this is really timely at this time? I
think it absolutely is. I mean, I definitely heard about, you hear in the media, that people regard the federal government as very, untrustworthy and corrupt. And I have to tell you that when I heard a story a couple months ago where somebody made that kind of a statement, and I felt really bad, because I was like, I'm not doing my job. And so I feel I take it personally. I think it's really important to protect the work that the folks at my agency in particular are doing, because they're doing really important things. And so I think that this is definitely a very timely topic to be discussing.
So Liz had mentioned the recent news reports like that. Could you also go into just a little bit, how this is timely with regard to the upcoming transition?
Sure. So anytime you have people, going and coming, 502 is going to play an issue, especially when they're coming. And that's going to, when they're coming from private industry, from universities, people that do business with your particular agency, and being able to educate people beforehand. We do a lot of outreach during our annual ethics training with senior managers. In fact, we do our annual ethics training with senior managers in person every year, and we drive home this particular regulation so that they are aware of it. So when they are hiring, and there's somebody that is really, really qualified for a position, but they're from a contractor, and we really want them to work on it, something involving that contractor, they come to us early in the process, so we don't get too far down the road where the person's here and they can't do their job. And so that's what we're trying to prevent. Definitely going to be important come, January 20th, 2017.
That's right, because we're going to have all kinds of new people running around all over the place.
That's
very
right.
high-level individuals bringing Schedule C employees with them.
That's right.
And there is a professional government there's a professional government system where we all work for it and we're not political, but you will still see people leaving and coming into government, based upon the election.
And they're all here to do a specific job, and my job is to, regardless of whether they're a political appointee, career employee, my job is to protect the work they're doing, and that's what I view my responsibility as. And so, in trying to engage them and using the transition process to get to know them, to get them to trust our office is going to be really important, especially in that scenario.
I like how you brought up, getting to know them right away so that they can learn this. 502 is a terribly complex regulation, and
it took me about a year when I was a baby attorney.
It's terribly complex. But like you said, as soon as we can get these folks in and get them a little bit educated as to what the risks are, so that they start coming to you beforehand,
That's right.
the better off that we're going to be. Not just for the sake of the transition itself, but for the sake of the 4 years or the 8 years after that.
Absolutely. It only can help your agency in preparing for that, for the onslaught of people that are about to come in. I mean, we're looking at, we have probably about 250 political appointees who will leave and come at the same time.
Wow.
And so that's a lot of people with a relatively small staff to handle all of that, plus everything else that continues to go on. And I'm not the only one in that boat, and there's a lot of other, ethics officials across the government who are going to be facing this challenge as well.
And I think that piggybacks off of the earlier session today about presidential transition, where they seem to really focus on getting things done as early as we can. So it's sometimes I think people would probably think 502 isn't something that you can really tackle before someone starts, but from what you're saying, that it is possible to do that.
It is. So we've actually already started planning for transition, and we started, I want to say, probably a couple months before, right around Thanksgiving time. And where we started is just basic baby steps, understanding, where our statutory positions are, who's a presidential appointee. There's some positions that are required by statute but are not a presidential appointee position, but also having just an outline of what each office does, because then you can have, you'll know, or at least anticipate the universe of conflicts. So as people are coming in, you can kind of help say to them, look, if you find somebody that looks like a great qualified candidate for this office, let us know. Let us talk to them early on. We're happy to do this. And really kind of selling your services. I mean, I view myself as being in the customer service business and trying to let them know what we can provide to help them as they're trying to fill these vacant positions in a relatively short period of time.
So I hate to cut it short, but we're getting ready to start our next main session here in the auditorium at the National Government Ethics Summit. So Tina, thank you so much for joining us for this, and we hope that we will see you around at the summit some more.
Yeah, thanks so much, Ryan and Liz. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I see it's 1:45. I'm going to get started because we have a lot to cover today. I've been told one of the things that we have to cover is an announcement that in the courtyard behind this auditorium, there is no eating, smoking, drinking. So now that that's out of the way, we can start talking about professors, authors, book deals, and related intellectual property. I'm Seth Jaffe. I'm the Chief of the Ethics Law and Policy Branch. Thank you very much for attending the session today. As many of you know, the topic of teaching, speaking, and writing and being able to get paid for writing a book is a complicated area with a lot of different ethics issues involved. Now, during a transition, and as you know, the theme of this year's summit is the presidential transition. During a transition and leading up to a transition, there's really an uptick in the advice that's needed on book deals or outside teaching, speaking, and writing. Many individuals who are leaving the government are thinking about doing some writing. Many nominees who are coming into the government are professors or authors who have intellectual property rights or might have it in their mind that they want to continue writing as an outside activity when they come into the government. So we thought this would be an excellent time for a refresher on the rules that apply to outside teaching, speaking, and writing and the ability or the limitations on employees for getting paid for this outside activity. So today, we're going to more specifically focus on when may an employee receive compensation for writing a book. But before we jump right into that question, what I want to do is step back for a second and think about the purposes for having these limitations on the ability for government employees to write in an outside capacity and to get paid for it. So in our preamble to 807, the Teaching, Speaking, and Writing Rule, it kind of lays out the purposes of the regulations and other rules in this area. Basically, we want to make sure that employees are not using their public office for private gain in a way that's impermissible, or even creating that appearance. Because if a person's using their public office for private gain or creating that appearance, then the public won't believe that that person's undertaking their government activities with integrity. So when we go through a lot of the rules today, and there are a lot of rules, and the limitations that are out there, I want you to keep these purposes in mind because these purposes really animate the reasons for the rule and the outcome that we're trying to achieve. So, when may an employee receive compensation for writing a book? It seems like a really simple question, but ultimately it is not a simple question because there are a lot of executive orders, regulations, and outside income limitations that apply to employees who want to get paid for outside teaching, speaking, or writing. Now, we issued a legal advisory in 2008, which many of you may have read. And that was our attempt to kind of pull together these diverse sources of authority and to give comprehensive guidance in the area of outside teaching, speaking, and writing, and when a person can get paid for it. So we're going to review some of the major points of this legal advisory today, but we're not going to have time to go over everything. We'll emphasize some of the quick reference tools, the tables, and the citation indexes that are in the legal advisory so you can have an idea of how to use those and how they can be great shortcuts to answering a question of whether or not an employee can get paid for writing a book. And one thing I want to emphasize up front is that 807 in the Standards of Conduct does not prohibit writing on any particular topic. It's really a specific limitation on the ability of government employees to write while they're in government service on a topic that's related to their official duties and to get paid for it. So basically, 807 is a limitation on the ability of government employees from getting paid in certain circumstances for their outside writing. That's really the nature of the limitation that we're talking about. Now, initially, in our attempt to try to pull together all these sources, we tried to come up with one flow chart, one decision tree that we could send ethics officials to figure out how to answer this question, this one graphic representation of how to get you through this process and give effective and timely advice. And every time we tried to come up with this decision tree or the flow chart, it ended up looking a little something like this. There were just too many rules, regulations, statutes, executive orders that came into play. You have supplemental agency regulations, the criminal conflict of interest laws, outside earned income limitations, outside earned income ban, teaching, speaking, and writing rules, misuse of position, the type of employee matters as far as what your answer is going to be. Is it an SGE? Is it a covered non-career employee? So there were just too many issues to address every time that person stands in your office and says, can I get paid for writing a book, to put in one graphic representation how to answer the question. So what we decided to do was to structure a legal advisory around the issues that you're going to have to answer and the questions that are going to come up on a regular basis, such as who wrote the book? What is the book about? What is the type of compensation that's being offered? When is the compensation received? Who's making the offer? Why are they making the offer? Are there any other ethics considerations? And there are always other ethics considerations, such as use of title, use of time, subordinates time. So what we decided to do is to structure the legal advisory around the answers to these questions. So it's not a flow chart or a decision tree exactly, but it's kind of a suggested template of how to approach a book deal question. Now, you'll see here on the slide, I have the Colbert Report. That's not always relevant, but sometimes it's relevant in the analysis. And I have that up there just to illustrate how when you think you've answered every question, there could be another question that comes up. A few years ago, an employee at an agency had written a book and had run all the traps through their ethics official, and everything was copacetic with the rules and the regulations. And they were going to go on the Colbert Report to talk about their outside writing. So they went to their ethics official and said, you know, I'm going to go on this show and I'm going to talk about my book. Are there any limitations? And so, of course, first of all, they said, well, there's, limitation on your use of title. So tell the producer of the show that when you are announced on stage to go see Mr. Colbert, don't just announce you by your name and your official title. He said also, when you're sitting at the table there, don't have, the screen say your name and your official title, because, there are limitations on the use of official title in 807B. So, oh, fine, fine. He tells the producer that. So, of course, when the show comes, is announced, comes out onto the stage by his name and official title, and then you're sitting at the table, and it's just the name and the official title that's kind of the runner under the screen for this person. Now, ultimately, because they made a good faith effort not to use or permit the use of their title in a way that would violate our rules ahead of time, and they told the producers what to do, even though they didn't follow it, that wasn't a violation of our regulations. But the point was that there's always one more issue that you have to deal with, and that's why we also have your handouts today and the legal advisory that deals with, or at least red flags for you, all the different issues that might come up when you're dealing with this question. So let's talk about and dive into the template for how to answer these questions. So here's the template. You want to start out being able to answer all these questions. You're going to have to answer it at some point. So first you want to start, I really suggest you start with figuring out what category of employee is seeking compensation for writing a book. And that's, of course, important because different rules apply depending on what type of category of employee you're dealing with. And we're going to talk about that some more. Next, what is the book about? Because, of course, this is a limitation on being able to do outside writing and getting paid for it if it relates to your official duties. Well, if it relates to your official duties, one way that can happen is based on the topic of the book, of course. When is the writing performed and when is the compensation received? This is a little bit of an esoteric question, but it's very important and can be a little complicated, but it matters because the rules only apply if you're talking about a current government employee, and when the writing is performed and when the compensation is received is going to tell you whether the rules even apply to them at all. What is the type of compensation? The type of compensation offered is very important because under different rules, different forms of compensation either count or don't count or excluded or not excluded from a definition. Who is offering the compensation and why? That's also very important. It's a little counterintuitive, but one of the ways in which a book or a writing outside teaching, speaking, and writing can be related to an employee's official duties is based on who made the offer of compensation and why, not the topic of the book. So we'll talk about that in a minute. What other ethics rules and considerations may apply? And as I said, there are almost always other ethics rules and considerations: use of time, use of government property, subordinates' time, use of title, and other issues as well. So before I go on to talk about jumping into kind of the first question here on what category of employee is seeking compensation for writing a book, any questions on anything I've said so far? Yes?
Yes, I thought there was a sort of a disconnect between the social media guidelines and the rules on teaching, speaking, and writing, because I always thought the teaching, speaking, and writing rule was clear. You're writing in your personal capacity. Don't get identified by your government title, except,
Mm-hmm.
or little bio. And then the social media guidance came out, and it said you can be identified by your title unless there could be confusion.
Mm-hmm.
Social media seems to me to be writing. So I used to tell employees, don't be identified by your title and your personal stuff. And now it's much fuzzier.
Right.
And there's
So,
different rules, and they sort of address the same thing.
well, I have an answer for that. I like to thank Carrie for asking what ultimately is a very complicated topic and a very complicated subject. And I'm going to repeat the question for our viewers at home. Basically, I was asked kind of the use of official title. How does the teaching, speaking, and writing use of official title, I would characterize this, intersect with the use of title or government sanction or official government sanction under the misuse of position regulations? And is there some disconnect or tension between our social media legal advisory, which I think is more in the realm of misuse of position, versus teaching, speaking, or writing? Now, we have very specific regulations, 807B for teaching, speaking, or writing, when the topic is specifically teaching, speaking, or writing. Of course, there are a lot of activities that involve speaking or writing that we don't necessarily consider subject to the specific rules of 807. Like if you have an outside activity, you have an outside job, and you're a lawyer, and you write a brief, and you get paid for it, we don't subject that brief and writing your name on it to the rules under 807 necessarily, but it would be subject to outside activity regulations other than teaching, speaking, or writing, because that's not primarily a teaching, speaking, or writing activity. So what I think we've primarily done in social media is we said first, that social media advisory addresses personal use of social media, and that personal use of social media is primarily perceived to be a personal capacity activity. So that's the original starting point. Then the regulation that really would apply to what you post on your social media would really be 702, as far as whether or not there's a potential for confusion for official government sanction or endorsement. And that's a much more fact-specific situation where a totality of the circumstances would apply versus any particular 807 application for the use of title. So I would say that there is a tension. It's not really always exactly clear when something is writing versus a different type of outside activity. But I would say for social media and personal use of social media, there is kind of an inherent bias that it would be perceived as personal. But that can be overcome if there is too much use of indicia of your official position that could confuse someone to think that the government is sanctioning or endorsing your activity. So for instance, even in 807, you can use your official title if it's a list of several biographical details where your official title is not more prominently listed. So even in 807, you can use your official title in certain circumstances, and I think the same is true in social media. The use of the official title can be on a social media account in some capacity, but not so blatant or dominant that it would confuse people as to who is endorsing your social media use. Okay, so the first question that you have to answer is what category of employee is writing a book? And we're going to start with regular employees and SGEs, because those are the vast majority of employees who you'll be dealing with. Now, can anyone tell me where the definition in our regulation is for regular employee? Okay, I'm glad no one raised their hand because there is no definition of regular employee. Regular employee is defined by what it is not. Now, I'm a regular employee. Vast majority of the people in this room are regular employees. Regular employees are not special government employees. They're not covered non-career employees, and they're not employees appointed by the president. You know, your typical GS-13, if someone on the GS schedule is going to be a regular employee, that's going to be the vast majority of employees you'll deal with. Next are special government employees. I think most people here know what those are. Special government employees are employees who are retained to work temporarily for the government for a period not to exceed 130 days in any 365-day period. So this is the first question you have to answer. You have to know who's sitting in front of you and who's asking you this question, can I get paid for writing my book? Because different rules will apply depending on the answer to this question. This is the threshold question. And so we're going to talk about regular employees and SGs now. In the last 15 minutes or so, we're going to talk about covered non-career and presidentially appointed to full-time non-career position employees. Okay, so next question, what is the book about? The Standards of Conduct and 807 describes 6 ways in which a book can be considered related to a regular employee's or an SGE's official duties. And if it falls into one of these 6 categories, then typically the employee is not going to be able to get paid for writing that book. Now, these 6 ways can really be divided into 2 main classifications. First, the book can be related to the employee's official duties based on what the book is about. I think that's pretty intuitive. A little less intuitively, the book can be related to the employee's official duties based on who made the offer of compensation and why they made that offer. So, based on who made the offer and why. So first, if the invitation is from a person who's affected by the performance or non-performance of the official's duties, then the book will be related to their official duties. This is what we call a bad prohibited source. So for example, if you have a person who makes decisions on grant applications at an agency, and you have a grantee who makes a book deal offer to that employee. Now, a book deal might be on stamp collecting, that might have nothing to do with the employee's official duties, but because who made the offer, the bad prohibited source, that stamp collecting book is now related to the employee's official duties, and they can't write a book about it and get paid for it while they're in the government. Additionally, if the invitation was primarily offered because of the official's official position. So if a book were offered, a book deal were offered to all IT professionals at your agency, and a publishing house was willing to, again, have them do a stamp collecting book. Again, stamp collecting, nothing to do with the agency's mission, but it's related to the official position. It's related to official duties because the offer was made primarily because of the official position. Now, these examples don't happen very often, and I want to talk more about what the book is about. When the book is related to official duties based on what the book is about. First, it can be related to official duties because it's undertaken as part of official duties. So if a person writes a report and then wants to publish that report in their personal capacity and get paid for it, that not only would violate 807, that might violate the supplementation of salary criminal conflict of interest law. Of course, SGEs are not subject to 18 U.S.C. 209, but they still would be prohibited from doing it under 807. If the book draws substantially on non-public information, and there are definitions of that in the regulation. If it's a matter to which the employee has been assigned to within the last year. Now, if it's an SGE, it would have to be a party matter to which they've been assigned to. SGE who served less than 60 days, it would have to be a matter to which they've been a party matter in which they've been assigned to in the last year. Now, the area that you'll probably get a lot of questions, and that I see a lot of questions that agency ethics officials have, is if they're wondering whether or not the book is related to the employee's official duties because whether or not it deals in significant part with an ongoing or announced policy, program, or operation of the agency. So because you get that question a lot, and you probably have to grapple with that, we're going to talk about that some more. But you'll see here that SGEs are not subject to this. This is not part of the definition of related to official duties for SGEs. So what that means is that the definition of related to official duties is narrower for SGEs. If the definition is narrower for SGEs and the prohibition is tied to that definition, that means SGEs have a larger number of topics in which they can write about and get paid for. So the more narrow the definition of related to official duties, the more permissive the ability for an employee to get paid for their outside teaching, speaking, or writing. And what you'll see is that the higher up the food chain you go in a position, SGE, regular employee, covered non-career, presidentially appointed, the definition of related to official duties gets broader and broader. So the permissible number of topics that these higher level employees can write on and get paid for gets more narrow and more narrow under 807. I think that makes sense. Now let's talk about deals in significant part with an ongoing policy, program, or operation of the agency. Now, this seems like it's one element, but there's actually several elements kind of buried in this language. So in order for it to be related to official duties, in this one prong of the 6 prongs, is that it has to deal in significant part with an ongoing or announced policy, program, or operation of the agency. So it has to deal in significant part. So if you had a book that an employee was writing and it dealt in an insignificant way with the agency's policies, programs, or operations of the agency, that might be permissible, like if one chapter dealt with it. It has to be an ongoing or announced policy, program, or operation. So if it's a program or policy that the agency has ceased to operate, so it's over, it's done with, then that's not prohibited here, getting paid for writing on something like that. It says ongoing or announced. And what announced means is it's announced as a looking forward provision. So maybe it hasn't started yet, but the agency has announced it's going to start. This program will start. So ongoing or announced, the announced is really a forward-looking element. Policy, program, or operation of the agency. So it has to be something kind of narrow, that it is a defined policy, program, or operation of the agency. Now, I don't have enough time today to go into a lengthy review of analyzing each one of the ways in which a book can be related to official duties based on this prong, but I do want to point out a few resources that you can look to when you're confronted with this question, and this is the question that you're concerned about. So for regular employees, you can look to 807 A2I, examples 3 through 6, and there are varying gradations of the nexus between the topic in the example and the agency programs and policies or operations of the employee in question in the example, and there's a very good help there for regular employees. Next, there is, for SGEs, illustrating the more narrow definition for related to official duties for SGEs in examples 7 and 8. And also, there's an advisory opinion 01X10, that's from, of course, 2001, and that dealt with administrative law judge from the Social Security Administration named Wolf. Not so coincidentally, the same name as the person there in the case that happened in 2006. It's up there on your screen. And there's an analysis of this prong of the test in that legal advisory. And ALJ Wolf was an SSA ALJ, and he wrote a book. And the book's topic basically could be boiled down to how to present cases before SSA ALJs. And so the SSA ethics official told him he couldn't get paid for writing that book because it dealt in significant part with an ongoing policy, program, or operation of the agency. He didn't agree, ended up going into court, ended up getting itself to the 10th Circuit. Now, there were two important holdings of the 10th Circuit Court. First, the court held that the application of 807 did not violate Wolf's First Amendment rights. And this is because the regulation was narrowly tailored to achieve a significant government interest, which was to make sure that employees perform their services with integrity. And it also said that OGE's interpretation of deals in significant part with an ongoing policy, program, or operation of the agency was appropriately applied to Wolf. So if you want to look at the Wolf case and look at that legal advisory, there is a kind of a step-by-step process of applying the facts to the law as it applied to this particular book. Now, there could be a whole class on when is teaching, speaking, or writing related to an employee's official duties. In fact, there is a whole class on that topic alone. It's on our website. If you go to the Education tab, which is the top blue tab on our website, and then on the scroll-down menu, it's Education Training Resources, and then OGE training courses on Max. There's a 45-minute Ethics Fundamentals class just on this one topic. And I just want to give a plug. I think you saw it a little bit earlier in the year in review. There's a tremendous resource of dozens of classes indexed by topic that you can go and just kind of surf and then click on the course, and you can even go to particular portions of these classes that are particularly helpful to you. But I would just say when I got here to OGE 10 years ago, there certainly was nothing like that on our website, and I strongly recommend that you go there generally and specifically for this class. So I hope that these resources will help you when you're confronted with an employee who wants to know if they can get paid for outside teaching, speaking, or writing, and you really need to know whether or not, or make the determination whether or not the subject matter of that writing deals a significant part with your agency's ongoing policies, programs, or operations. Any questions about this before I move on to the timing of the writing and the receipt of compensation? Okay. Timing of the writing and receipt of compensation. So because the standards of conduct only apply to employees, it's critical that the writing occur, at least some part of it, during the employee's government service, and that he or she receive a portion of the compensation while they're employed by the government. Now, receive is a term of art, and it does not equal the time in which the employee pockets the money. So it's not just the time when the check arrives in the mail and they put the money in their pocket. That's not the date of receipt. Receipt includes any form of consideration. So when a contract is signed, you've received the consideration for the contract, the promise for the promise. And we're going to talk a little bit about why that is, and I'll go through some examples and say and show how that works out in practice. So, but these timing issues can make the analyses of these questions, pretty difficult. Although it's complex, there are a couple of rules of thumb to keep in mind. First, the ethics rules do not restrict the receipt of compensation unless some of the writing occurs during government service. If all the writing has been done before government service, there's not going to be anything during, or all the writing is going to happen after the person leaves government, the rules don't even apply. Okay, next. So second, if the writing is undertaken pursuant to a contract, the receipt of the compensation is attributable to the time the writing occurs. Yes? Sure.
So what if someone wants to write a tell-all based on their years at an agency and based on diaries and journals that they kept while they were employees, but they didn't actually start writing the book until later?
Right, so the question is, and I was going to use that as an example later, the question is, what if a person keeps diaries or journals while they're in government, and then after they leave, I think the question is, they then base a book on that and sign a contract to get paid for that then, and let's say those diaries and journals relate to their official duties. So in that case, they've written the book on speculation, so while they're in government, they're saying, I hope someday to get paid for this writing that I'm doing, and then they leave government. And then, after they're gone, they write this book. Now, there might be other regulations or statutes, like if it's classified information, if it has non-public information in it, but just under 807 or the outsider income ban or the outsider income limitation, having a diary and notes and then waiting until after you leave to sign a contract would be permissible. And I'm going to go in, I have a graph, nice pretty graph and everything to kind of illustrate the timing issues. But that's a good question, and that would, in theory, be permissible. So, but if you have a contract, so in this example, if the person had a contract to base a book on these diaries or notes, and they had that contract while they were in government, and then, so there's writing while in government, there's government service, and there's a contract while they're in government, and they then actually publish the book after they leave, that wouldn't be permissible. If it relates to official duties, that would violate 807. Of course, it's difficult after someone has left government to discipline someone, but at the same time, the accurate advice to that person would be, if you do this, you will be violating this regulation. So while ethics rules generally only restrict the receipt of compensation during government service, because of this definition of receipt, in certain cases, payments that are made before or payments that are made after government might still be restricted. And I just gave you one example where the payment being pocketed after they leave is still restricted under the regulation. But we're going to talk about this in more detail right now. So I think here's a good conceptual framework to think about this. There is a bottom line here. The bottom line is that government service, compensation, and writing must overlap at some point in time in order for the rules to apply. So if you look at the screen here, we have the activity on the y-axis, and the activity is writing, compensation, government service. On the x-axis, we have time. In order for the rules to apply, you have to be able to bisect all three of these lines at one point in time for the rules to apply. When I say the rules, it's going to be 807, outsider income ban, outsider income limitation. So what is this example here with these lines the way they're drawn? What does this show? Well, you have an employee who signed a contract here at this point in time to write a book. Now, that's before they've entered government. It's before they've done any writing. They wait a few months, and a few months later, they start writing when they're in government. And they write for a few months, they stay in government service for a year. But that compensation, when they sign the contract, they're continually receiving the compensation, whether it's a book advance or an agreement to get royalties out here when the payments are actually going to be pocketed when the book is sold years later. The point is, that compensation is being received that whole time. And that compensation is attributable, because they had a contract, at least in part, to the time the writing occurred, which is during government service. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the purposes of that in a minute, but that's how we determine whether or not someone is subject to the rules in the first instance. So basically, if you have writing, government service, and a signed contract to get paid for that writing, and that contract happened either before or during government service. In practice, that's how you're going to make sure that people, the rules apply to them. Writing, government service, receipt of compensation all overlap at some point in time. If they write on speculation during government service, there's no receipt of compensation. But if they're writing while in government service and they have a contract and they're performing under the contract, they're receiving compensation during their government service. So let's talk about some examples. Yes?
What about edits? We get quite a few questions about people that have written before they started to work for the government, and then there's some edits that need to be done who can be accepted.
That's a very good question. I was going to answer that later, but you know what? I'm going to answer that now. So the question is, what about a person who's written their book before they come into government service, and then they want to edit the book or continue writing the book while they're in government service? Now, one of the other issues that comes up, which I'll talk about later, are what we call writing-related activities, like editing, proofreading, formatting. And what we say is that anything that substantively changes the meaning of the text is writing. So, for instance, you don't have to put pen to paper. You can dictate into a machine, or you can tell a ghostwriter to write something. You're still writing, because what you're doing is you're creating the content that is going to be used in the writing. You don't actually have to touch pen to paper. Now, editing, typically substantive editing, we consider to be writing. Because when you're editing a document, you know you're changing the words around, you're changing the meaning. So continuing to edit would be generally considered to be writing. Proofreading for typos, for that type of thing, would not be considered writing usually. But it would be considered compensation for services performed, which could be important under the outsider income ban, but it's not writing. Formatting changes, probably not writing. But the limitations are going to apply to someone who have basically written their book before they came in, but then are going to continue writing it while they're in. So the rules will apply. Yes?
With regard to compensation, is a requirement that there be payment? We have somebody who's written a book, or a chapter in a book. We don't know if they have a contract, but we can find out. Would that contract be considered compensation even though he's not expecting or going to take any kind of financial benefit from it?
Well, so the question is, if a person has a contract but they basically haven't been paid yet, does that count as compensation? They're not going to be paid. Well, I guess it depends on the structure of the contract. Typically speaking, if you have a contract and you're just deferring payment until after you leave government, that would be receipt of compensation. You wouldn't have to pocket the money yet. Depending on how a contract is structured, if a person has a contract to write a book, but they forego any rights to receive payment, then they probably haven't received payment. Now, they can't direct the payment to someone else. They'd have to just give up the rights to be paid. If they're saying, oh, pay my spouse, pay a charity, then they've received it and then directed it. Can't do that. But if they're just saying, I'm writing a book for free, and whatever money that might be generated from this, I forego any rights to receive those payments, then that would probably not be considered for compensation. So some of my examples here we may have touched upon. So let's say you have a person who's written a book before they enter government service, and they then are going to get paid. So the writing occurs over here. They write the book before they enter government service. Then they enter government service, and they pocket the money, and they're in government service. That would be okay because writing here, that writing line will have ended prior to the government service line beginning. Writing and compensation may have overlapped, but the government service line didn't start until after the writing ended. So typically, if you have an incoming employee, the best thing to tell them to get out of the rules is to say, stop writing. If you stop writing or stop performing any services before you come in, then you're going to be pretty much okay under the rules. Now, there might be reasons that a person can continue to write, but if they want to be sure the rules aren't going to apply to their previous writing, then they would stop before they enter government service. Doesn't mean they have to, but it does mean that they'd be safe under the rules. Now, similarly, if you have an employee, a former employee, their government service ends, and they start writing the book over here. So they're in government service, they sign the contract, and they're going to pay them a lot of money, but they defer writing the book until after they leave government. Well, in that case, the 807 wouldn't apply because the compensation in the government service line will end before the writing line on this chart begins. So you have to have that overlap of all three. Now, however, an employee can't just sign a contract, begin writing while they're in government service, and defer the time that they get to pocket the money. They'll say, put the check in the mail and just mail it the day after I'm done with my government service. So I'm going to write this book. You're my publisher. You're going to pay me a lot of money. We have a binding contract. And I'm going to start writing in government, but just send me the check the day after. And in that case, you will have received the compensation, or at least some compensation, when you sign that contract, because the definition of compensation includes any form of consideration, which of course is a contract. Yes?
Would that include a contract where they were going to forego any royalties or anything else up until the date they leave government service, and then after government service, any subsequent,
Right.
revenue would result in royalty? Would that be considered compensation within the government service?
Right, so the question is, what if they structure a contract to say, I won't have any right to compensation while I'm in government, but then the day I leave, start paying me after I leave. I think in that situation, we would consider that receipt of compensation because they will have signed the contract entitling them to that consideration while they're in government, while they're writing. They get that right at that first time they sign the contract.
Even if it's based on future sales of the book?
Even if it's based on future sales of the book. Now, part of the reason that we have this rule in here about not being able to simply defer the payment is because ultimately, when you think about it, it would pretty much undermine the whole purpose of the regulation. Anyone could write a book related to their official duties and say, well, just pay me at the minute I leave. So remember, the purposes of the rules are to try to make sure people aren't using public office or private gain, and also to try to ensure that the public feels that government employees who have written a book and employees who haven't written a book, are performing their jobs with integrity. If you had a high-ranking, say, career general counsel at an agency, and there was a bad prohibited source who could be affected by the performance or non-performance of her job, and then had a book deal to pay that GC $1 million, but just said, well, I just won't pay you until after you leave, I think that would undermine the purposes of the rules. And when this rule was instituted, it was in part a reaction to some high-ranking officials in the legislative branch and the executive branch who were doing this type of thing. So I think, without this without this interpretation, then it would pretty much undermine the purposes of the regulation. Now, let me give you another example. Let's say, and it touched upon an example, a real-life example that was just brought up. Let's say you have a professor who's coming in as a nominee to an agency. And the professor has written a textbook. Very often, these textbooks, of course, may be related to the mission of the agency for which he's being hired. Now, he has expertise in a particular area, and the agency wants that expertise. Of course, the person's written a textbook in this area. Typically, that's a qualification for the job. So if the professor has written the textbook, the first edition of the textbook, before he or she enters government, and then gets compensation through their government service, that's fine because there's been no writing during government service. Of course, very often the person wants to update their textbook, second, third, fourth editions. Now, in this situation, the person signed the contract here, and they write the first edition, and they want to write the second edition during government service. Can't do that if it relates to official duties and get paid for it. Now, what they might be able to do is have their co-authors write the second edition, or have a former student of theirs write their portion of the second edition. They may even get to keep their name on the book if they don't misuse their title, and they might even be able to receive compensation for the second edition, depending on whether or not they actually performed any services toward the second edition. They might be able to receive payment based on their contribution to the book in the first edition. But professors coming in very often want to write the updates to their textbook, and I would say always be alert to the fact that when you have a professor coming in who has a textbook, that this teaching, speaking, and writing regulation could very much apply to them and could be a real sticking point for them when they're coming in. I see Carrie's nodding her head because I know that's an issue at the Fed. It's an issue at lots of agencies. Okay, let's talk about the type of compensation. So for book deals, the two most common types of compensation are an advance, which is an upfront cash payment from the publisher to the author, earned back through future sales of the book. So we're giving you the money first before there's any kind of an upfront reward for your entering into this contract prior to us knowing what the outcome of your book's going to be. And then there's royalties, which is kind of the reverse of that. And that's the percentage of the proceeds from sold books paid from the author, from the publisher to the author. And that's kind of a back-end royalties deal. Those are the two most common types of compensation. Of course, there can be speaking fees, which is also compensation if you're going out to speak about your book. However, for regular employees, yes, see, here's a question.
Yeah, what about through website promotion, advertisements? We've had some employees who have an expertise in a particular field, obviously related to their official duties, and they want to build a website and say, I'm going to put all this great information on how to do X on our website, and I'm not going to sell anything or charge anybody, but it's Google or it's YouTube, and there's going to be advertisements on there, and I'm going to be able to collect revenue. It may not be substantial revenue, but it is something.
Right, so there's a question about a person who has an outside activity who might be putting information that's related to their official duties on that website, and it might be on YouTube, it might be in some social media outlet, and they're maybe claiming that they're not getting paid for that. First, I would just say, you might want to attend the social media presentation tomorrow, and I think it's going to be a very fact-specific situation about whether A, that even falls in the teaching, speaking, or writing rules, and B, whether it's potential misuse of position for potential government sanction or endorsement, and whether or not it's non-public information the person's sharing. So I would just say that it might be a little bit beyond the scope of the talk today, but you might want to go to the 10:30 social media presentation tomorrow. Well, it's a little bit blurry on the edges. The question is, what is, I'll interpret the question to be, well, what really constitutes teaching, speaking, or writing, where these are the regulations that apply, and whether it's compensation for teaching, speaking, or writing, because as I alluded to earlier, there's lots of outside activities, like being a lawyer or being an accountant or doing some other outside job that clearly involves speaking and writing. But again, the way I consider it is that the teaching, speaking, or writing rules are generally geared toward compensation for the speaking or writing being the primary product of what it is you're producing, as opposed to ancillary or just coming out of the main activity, which is being a lawyer for a law firm, as an outside activity. But it does, it is unclear sometimes what exactly is teaching, speaking, and writing, what is subject to other regulations for other outside activities. So, then travel for regular employees and SGEs, reimbursement for travel expenses are excluded from the definition of compensation. So, for example, you have a regular employee, they write a book that's related to their official duties while they're a government employee. They can't get paid for writing that book. They cannot get paid for giving a speech about that book, but they could receive a reimbursement for the travel expenses to go speak about the book. So it's exempted from the definition for regular employees and SGEs, the reimbursement for travel expenses that are in connection with the teaching, speaking, or writing. So now let's talk about who is offering the compensation and why. We've talked about this before. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but of course, a person's integrity could be questioned as a government employee based on who is making the offer, so if it's a bad prohibited source, or a person's integrity could be questioned and their performance, their official duties, based upon why the offer was being made. Now, one thing I want to point out here is that the offer, if you're analyzing this under why the offer was made, it has to be primarily because of the person's official position. Now, it's almost always the case that with government employees, and especially high-ranking government employees, that part of the reason they're going to be offered to write a book is because of their official position, or at least the experiences they've gained as a government employee. But if you're going to hang your hat on this as the only reason why they can't get paid for writing their book, you're going to want some strong indicia that the offer was made because of their official position, such as, all IT professionals at, financial agencies, we want to get a book from them, and really the offer is made to a position and not a person. You might think that this is a good enough reason in a particular fact pattern you have, and it might be a good enough reason to say someone can't get paid, but if this is the only reason, you want to make sure you've nailed it down. You might want to consult with OGE. Now, let's talk about what other ethics considerations are there, what other rules apply. Okay, writing-related activities, we touched upon that earlier. Editing is likely going to be considered writing. Proofreading, formatting changes, probably not writing. Supplemental agency regulations. Obviously, if your agency has a supplemental regulation, there might be a prior approval requirement before engaging in teaching, speaking, or writing. Might be some other limitation. Financial conflicts of interest. Now, I've seen this before. You have a new employee who comes into an agency, and they come from business, and they've written some, well-regarded book, and of course, they think it's a really good book. They've written it. And they come into their agency, and they say, you know what? The best thing to get this agency in shape was have everyone have a copy of my book. I've seen that. Not only have I seen that question come in, I've seen it actually happen. And so it's already a fait accompli. That's a 208. 18 U.S.C. 208. That's a financial conflict of interest there. Participating in a particular matter has a direct and predictable effect on your own financial interest. There's also an ability or willingness 208. You can't participate in any particular matter that would affect the ability or willingness of your publisher to pay under the terms of the contract. Impartiality concerns. This person will have a covered relationship with their publisher. Non-routine business consumer transaction, so this person's going to have to recuse from party matters that involve their publisher, where their publisher is a party or represents a party. Supplementation of salary. Alluded to that before. If you write a report, employee writes a report, and they want to publish that report privately and get paid for it, but they did it as part of their job, that would violate 807, might also violate supplementation of salary, criminal conflict of interest statute if they're a regular employee. Misuse of position. I've seen several times where people have their administrative assistants help them write their book on official time. It's happened. So you want to make sure use official time, computers, title, subordinates' time, and these are other issues that come up. So now we've gone through all the questions and some of the other considerations. Let's talk about the handouts that you have and the the reference guides that are in the legal advisory. So first, here is a table as it applies to regular employees and SGEs, and kind of a shortcut that you can use in determining whether or not they can get paid for writing a book. I know a lot of people who say the legal advisory is nice, it's 50 pages, but this table and the reference chart that we'll talk about in a minute is what they really use when they really need to know a quick answer. So how do you use this table? So first, you only use this table if you already know you're dealing with a regular employee or an SGE. It's a different table for covered non-career and presidentially appointed because different rules apply. Okay, so you know you're dealing with a regular employee, let's say, and you look at the first column, and you look at the first row here, it says the writing occurs before government service. Then the compensation is paid. This says received, it should say paid. Received is a term of art. So if the compensation is paid before government service, then 807 doesn't apply because all the writing finished and the compensation was paid prior to government service starting. So on that chart, the government service line begins after the writing line ended. So 807 doesn't apply, compensation is permitted. Now let's go down to a little more difficult question. Now let's say that the writing occurs during government service and the compensation is paid after government service. So in this case, the writing occurs during government service, they sign a contract to receive payment, and they just don't get the payment and pocket it until after they leave government service. And we'll talk about the asterisks in a minute. So in that case, all you know at this point is the 807 does apply because they wrote, had a contract during government service. So 807 applies. So now that 807 applies, you want to determine if it's related to official duties. And if it is, the compensation is barred. If it's not related to official duties, even though the writing was during, the contract was during government service, the compensation is permitted. And that's kind of the process you'd use for a regular employee. Now what about the asterisks? The asterisks basically just say the situation that we discussed before if the writing was done on speculation. Basically what it says is if you have writing during government service on speculation, you never sign the contract, and then after government service you get paid, then the rule doesn't apply. So I think that this is a chart that can be very helpful. And if you look too on your handout, there's this chart and then it continues to answer a couple more nuanced questions in the chart on the back, and that's all for regular employees and SGEs. And once you're familiar with this table, I think it really will help you answer these questions. So now, in addition to the tables that are in the legal advisory, there's also a citation overview. And I think what's really helpful about the citation overview is that the citations are keyed to the questions. So very often, there's this laundry list of questions we've talked about, but in reality, you know the answers to all of them except for one. You're kind of torn on one question, or you don't know the answer to this one issue. So if you go to the citation overview, you can say, I'm not really sure whether this writing is related to official duties based on what the book's about, and I'm dealing with an SGE. Well, this will show you where to go if you're dealing with an SGE, and it might give you a little bit of substantive information also about what the citations say or the substance of the answer. But mostly it's a citation index. But if you look here too, where it says, what is the timing of the work, right? So it says for regular and SGE, apparently the timing is the same, and these is a citation. But then there's some substance here where it says receipt of compensation is usually attributable to the time the writing occurs unless written solely on speculation during government service. So this is a citation index keyed to the question with also some substantive information in it. And it continues, again, following the questions. And here, I think this is helpful. What are the other considerations? So you've gone through and answered the first 5 questions, but then, the person might be doing a publicity tour. They might want to know about their travel expenses. They might want to know about a whole host of related issues. And this is kind of a one-stop shop for figuring out what those issues are and where the citations and the regulations are that can help you get the answers. So I think the citation overview can also be very helpful. So now that we've reviewed some of the rules as they apply to regular employees and SGEs, let's talk about how the rules apply to presidentially appointed employees and covered non-career employees. Now, the questions that you'll want to ask are the same. We're not going to go through every question again. What we're going to do is focus on the differences in how the rules apply to PA and CNC employees versus regular employees and SGEs. Now, you're still going to have to first figure out what category of employee you're dealing with. So the person walks into your office and wants to know if they get paid for writing a book, and you know that there's some political muckety-muck, but you're not exactly sure what their position is, whether they're covered non-career or whether they're presidentially appointed to a full-time position. So there are four primary things to remember about covered non-career. First, they're appointed to certain non-career, they have to be appointed to a non-career position. Basically means that they're a political appointee and that their appointment can be terminated at will by the appointing official. Second, they have to be classified in the GS schedule, if they're in the GS schedule, above a GS 15. And third, if they're not in the GS schedule, they have to be paid at a rate of at least 120% of the rate of minimum basic pay for a GS 15 step 1, and they can't be an SGE. For a PA employee, there are three things to look towards. One, they have to be appointed by the president. Next, they have to be a full-time employee, not an SGE. And third, they have to not be exempted. So for instance, in our regulations at 804, section 804 in the standards of conduct, presidentially appointed to a full-time position below a GS 9 is exempted from this. That's one example. Most are not exempted. So different rules apply for the PA employees and the CNC employees than they do for the regular employees and SGEs. That's why there are different tables for each in your handouts and in the legal advisory, and that's why there are different citation overviews. So what I want to do now, for the next few minutes, is talk about the different rules that apply. And all of these rules apply in the alternative. It's very important. What that means is if you have the outside earned income ban and you have 807 and they both apply to an employee, and one of the rules says you're good to go, and the other rule says you can't get paid anything under our rule, the rule that's more restrictive is the one that governs. Someone might be subject to the 15% outside earned income limitation and subject to the outside earned income ban because they're both a CNC and a PA employee, which I'll talk about in a minute. If they're subject to both these limitations, the limitation that is more restrictive governs. The rules apply in the alternative, and you have to remember to always apply all the rules that apply to this, to whatever individual you're talking with. So the first major way in which the rules differ for CNC and PA employees versus regular employees and SGEs is in the definition of related to official duties. The definition gets much broader, so what they can write on and get paid for gets much narrower. Basically, in addition to deals a significant part with an ongoing policy, program, or operation of the agency, these higher level employees are also will engage in writing related to their official duties if the subject matter of the book deals with the general subject matter area, industry, or economic sector primarily affected by the programs and operations of the agency. That's a much broader definition of related to official duties, the general subject matter area. That's pretty broad. So as a result, it's going to be much more difficult for a CNC employee or a PA employee to get paid for writing under 807. Now, the second major way in which the rules differ, and this is only for a CNC employee, a covered non-career employee, is they have outside earned income limitation regardless of what the reason is why they're earning the income. So basically, they're not allowed to earn more than 15% of an EL level 2 in any calendar year. That's $27,495. So if you have a covered non-career employee that's a political appointee above a GS 15, not appointed by the president, they're going to have a hard cap of $27,495 of outside earned income. Now, I'll talk about this in a minute, but the definition of compensation is different under the outside earned income limitation than it is under 807. Royalties on a book do not count as outside earned income or compensation, because royalties are considered more akin to a stream of income from a property right or from investment, from passive investment. It's not considered payment for services such as an advance or speaking fees. And individuals are allowed to have outside investments. So, as I said, the rules apply in the alternative. You have to remember, if you have a covered non-career employee who writes a book, they write a book and they're only going to get royalties. Well, under the outsider income limitation, they're good to go up to $27,495 in a calendar year because royalties don't count as earned income under the outsider income limitation. But remember, they're still subject to 807. So if that book is related to their official duties, they can't get anything. They can't even get the royalties. Example of how the rules apply in the alternative. 807 is still always going to apply to these higher level officials. They just have extra layers of rules that apply to them, either how the book relates to their official duties, or just an outright limitation or ban on their ability to get outside earned income. So in the example we talked about before about whether, proofreading or editing is writing or not, it wouldn't matter if it's writing or editing. It just matters for a PA or CNC, because that would be earned income that would either be subject to the limitation or subject to an outsider income ban for the PA employee. Now let's talk about an example. Let's say you have a CNC employee at NASA, and the employee writes a book about stamp collecting. And in every other way, the book's not related to their official duties. Subject matter is not related to their official duties. They can receive up to $27,495 in a calendar year for writing that book. Now the question, I want to have a show of hands. Now this is the CNC employee at NASA, stamp collecting book. Who thinks that that same CNC NASA employee can receive the $27,495 payment if they write a book about the space shuttle program? Okay. How many think they cannot receive that payment if it's write the book about the space shuttle program? How many aren't sure? Okay. So, first, now we know that a CNC employee is definitely subject to the to 807, and they are subject to this definition that if it deals in significant part with an ongoing announced policy, program, or operation of the agency. Is this an ongoing or announced policy, program, or operation of the agency? Probably is not, because the space shuttle program is probably not ongoing. I don't know that for a fact, but it probably isn't. NASA would know. It is surprising. We've actually had questions about programs that appear to be dormant, but in some ways aren't within the agency. Okay, but let's say it's not. What about the expanded definition of related to official duties, which is the general subject matter area, industry or economic sector primarily affected by the programs and operations of the agency? Well, I think it's not necessarily clear. NASA would have to make that call, but the idea here is that this expanded definition that CNC employees are subject to might, in this case, make it so they can't get any payment for this book, where under the outsider income limitation, they could get the $27,495. Of course, PA employees are subject to the outsider income ban, and they can't make any outside earned income whatsoever. Complete ban. Of course, the definition of compensation and earned income is different under the ban. It's a similar definition as it is to the limitation. It does not include royalties. But just so you know, even though the royalties really are like a property right or a stock interest, that's how we treat them. But if you have a person who has written a book before they come into government, and they want to option the book into a movie when they come into government, and this has happened several times. Now, the intellectual property rights, if they're basically selling those intellectual property rights or wanting to get a royalties or a stream of income from those intellectual property rights by optioning a book into a movie or by optioning some sort of script into a book or something like that, the royalties alone will not count against the 15% limitation. It won't count against the earned income ban. And basically, if all the work, all the writing, and all the consultation and all the work is done before they come into government, then they'd be able to get this income stream from this intellectual property after they come in. However, if They write that book, and then they want to option it into a movie after they come in, and then the person with whom they sign the contract to option the movie requires that they be a consultant or perform some services after they've come in, then that's going to be subject to the outsider income ban. Basically, if you have a person who can wrap up all their writing and all their work prior to coming in, but they then basically want to sell their intellectual property after they come in while performing no more services, then that would be permissible under the outsider income limitation, under the outsider income ban, and under 807. So how do you distinguish between CNC employees and PA employees? Now, the first thing to understand is that these categories are not mutually exclusive. Now, when I first started working on the legal advisory many years ago, it only took me about 6 months before I fully realized that some of these categories were not mutually exclusive. Hopefully, I just saved you all 6 months. So what you'll find is, and you can see from this Venn diagram, if you have an employee and you know they're a CNC employee, you know they're covered non-career, you know they're political, you know they're above a GS-15 or they make enough money, they're probably not also appointed by the president. They're probably not a PA, but you'd have to look. If, on the other hand, you know they're appointed by the president and you know that they're political, you know they're full-time, then it's almost certain that they're also going to be a CNC employee. Now, of course, this is important because the CNC employee is not subject to the outsider income ban, while the PA employee is. And of course, the rules apply in the alternative. So if you have a general counsel at an agency, a political general counsel who's appointed by the agency head, they're a covered non-career employee, most likely. They're not appointed by the president. They're not a PA employee. They can write that book that's not related to their official duties, the stamp collecting book, and get paid up to $27,495 in a calendar year. But if they were a PA employee, meaning that you have the same type of position, a political general counsel who is appointed by the president, that person who writes that book, the stamp collecting book, cannot receive any compensation. Of course, royalties are not compensation. You get royalties only. Now I want to move on to the table for the PA employees and the CNC employees. Again, you'd only use this table once you knew you were dealing with a political full-time employee. You can see this table is a little bit more involved in the first table. Again, because there are more rules that apply. So you would initially go through the same analysis as you would for a regular employee, but then you might have to continue. So let me show you what I mean by that. So here in the first column, you have the writing occurs before government service. The compensation is paid before government service. And then under 807, this is the same analysis you already did for a regular employee when we were going through the chart before, the table before. 807 doesn't apply because the writing finished before government service. 807 doesn't apply, the compensation is permitted. Now with a PA or a CNC employee, you'd have to keep going. Just to, you potentially would have to keep going if you didn't know the application to look at the outsider income limitation, the ban, and the limitation. And under this situation, the compensation is permitted because neither the ban nor the limitation apply. Now this becomes a little bit more relevant if you move down the chart table, and here you look at the 6th row, and say the writing occurs during government service. They sign the contract, and the compensation is paid after government service. So they've just deferred the payment. So they're in government service, they've done writing, they signed a contract, they have the compensation, but they haven't pocketed it yet. We'll talk about the asterisks in a minute. You then go to the 3rd box here, under 807, and you would see whether or not the book relates to official duties. Again, the same analysis you did for regular employees. If it's related to official duties, then the compensation's barred and you're done. That's it. You don't have to go on to the extra layers and the extra restrictions because it can't be more restrictive than you can't get it. However, if it's not related to official duties, then 807 does not prohibit. It would allow the receipt of this compensation. But because you have a PA employee or a CNC employee, you know there are more rules that apply to them, so that's not the end of your inquiry. For a PA employee, you go to the outsider income ban. Now, you've already determined that 807 doesn't prohibit it because it's not related to official duties. That's why you're still looking at this chart. If it's an advance, we'll pay you $1,000 up front to write this book, then the advance is barred. no outside earned income. If it's only royalties, we'll give you 5% of every book sold after the books are published, then that would be permitted because the book's neither related to official duties nor outside earned income. Now you'd go, if you have a CNC employee, it's not a PA employee, and you'd say, okay, the book title topic is not related to official duties. If it's an advance, that advance counts towards the $27,495 limit. So they would be able to get up to that limit. But if it's royalties, royalties don't count at all, and there'd be an unlimited amount of royalties that they could accept if the book was not related to official duties. The asterisks are the same thing here. Basically, this says if you wrote the book on speculation, so the writing occurs during government service, you don't have a contract during government service, you write it on speculation, you pocket the money after you leave, that just says the rules don't apply because no receipt of compensation during government service. Next, there's a citation overview, again, which can be particularly helpful when you're talking about a PA or a CNC employee because there are more rules that apply. There are more citations to know. I just point out here, when is the writing performed and compensation received? You have the answer to that question for a CNC and PA and broken out for CNC and PA. Again, you have some substance of what the actual rules say that are in the citation overview, although obviously you probably want to continue on to the citations to get more information. And we also have more information concerning what is the type of compensation, because the type of compensation, whether it's royalties or an advance, for instance, is going to matter much more than it would matter if you were dealing with a regular employee, and you have all the citations and some of the reasons why it's relevant here in the citation overview. Any questions about the citation overviews, the tables, anything else before we wrap up? Okay. Well, thank you very much for attending today. I know this can be a difficult area, but I hope if you look at the legal advisory, look at the handouts, you'll be able to use these tools, and you won't be shaking in your boots when an employee comes into your office and says, I've written a book, can I get paid for it? Thanks.
Hi, everybody, and welcome back. We just concluded a very interesting presentation on book deals, intellectual property, and authors by OGE's Seth Jaffe. I'm pleased to be joined in the booth by Mr. Christopher Schwartz, another staff attorney from OGE, who's going to be doing not one but two sessions over the course of the rest of the summit. Thanks very much for joining us, Chris.
Yeah, of course. Very happy to be here with both of you.
So your first session tomorrow will be on social media. What can you tell us about the session?
Well, if I told you everything, then nobody would come.
Oh, a little preview.
But this is, I think, going to be really a hot topic right now, and I think it has a lot to do with the significant cultural changes that we're seeing between those folks who are coming up in an era where that are digital natives are coming up in an era where the use of social media is widely accepted, and some earlier generations and others who are still who may not be as used to using it, and I think this is an area that is really going to be sort of the novel area. We put out a legal advisory in April of last year covering some of the questions, setting up a framework for application of the standards of conduct to social media, and hopefully when you the folks that have the opportunity to come tomorrow or watch us online, they're going to see that there are first we're going to highlight some really great opportunities of social media, ways that agencies can use it, and some tools that GSA is putting out. We're going to have Justin Herman from the Citizens Services and Innovative Technologies Office at GSA come and talk about some of the great things that you can do with social media. And then we're going to highlight some of the compliance challenges that we're having with social media. Ethics is one component of that, but you have everything from records keeping to FACA committees. You have the Information Quality Act. So it's across the board. So I really hope that people get a lot out of this, particularly the ability to set up a framework to look at how social media works, and know that it can be a little scary because it really is a new world out there with these types of technologies, but that there are tools and there are folks in the government that are interested in helping through the challenges and highlighting those opportunities. So I think that answers your question.
Yeah, for sure. I would think what probably adds to the complexity is that social media is always changing, right? Not only are the platforms expanding, but within the platforms themselves, they'll add tweaks here and there. So, I would think that complicates things in trying to figure out how agencies can deal with those situations. Would you agree?
Yeah, no, I definitely think that's right. I think that one of the things that is a constant issue is trying to set bright lines in the social media realm. And I think that there may be a tendency for some people to think that would be an easy way of dealing with this. It's something that we actually avoided in our social media legal advisory because it was something that we thought would potentially put us in a place where people would be getting confused, or the technology would move beyond where that bright line made any sense. So we understand that it's evolving, and that's, I think, one of the things that we're going to try and highlight is that it's more of an orientation issue, more of an understanding of how the technology works and orienting yourself towards that than it is necessarily answering specific questions and feeling like you've been able to sort of tie it to the ground.
So the theme of the summit is transition. Could you go just a little bit into the importance of understanding how social media and ethics and other regulations interact with the importance of ensuring a smooth transition?
Yeah, so what I would say, and so I'll highlight what I think is the number one issue for the presidential transition, and that is that a lot of executive branch agencies have official accounts, and they have multiple official accounts, and those official accounts sometimes are allocated to individuals throughout the agency. Your undersecretary, your secretary, your deputy secretary may have an account that they run, and that's kind of separate from the main social media account. And one of the things that I think is going to become very, very important is understanding what you're going to do with that account when that person is starting to move towards leaving? Are you going to decommission that account, make it inactive? Are you going to find a way to transfer that account to the next person that's sitting in that position? So I think that's really, to me, the most important issue when it comes to social media, because there are a lot of areas that could be, could come up in that. You could have records issues. You could have property issues. You could have ethics issues if there are coercive activities involved in that area. And setting a policy beforehand will make sure that you're not dealing with it on an ad hoc basis. So I think that's really one of the areas. But I think the other is educating. This is a new area, and we expect that the next administration will probably be using social media as well. But just like all the other areas of ethics, getting them up to speed on how the ethics rules orient around this type of holistic technology is something that I think we're definitely maybe a challenge, and so something that I think agencies may want to start turning their minds to, putting together pretty comprehensive packages of policies on this now.
We heard in the session that just ended that a question actually came up about writing and how that intersects with social media. Will you be addressing any of that during your session on social media?
Yeah, so we're gonna talk about some of the compliance challenges as it comes to official usage of social media accounts, but we're also going to turn to some of the issues that were highlighted in our legal advisory from April, including some of the issues as it comes to attribution, which are very big, and those are really specific concerns that came up, and that's really why we wrote the legal advisory. That was the trend that we were seeing, were concerns about attribution, when you could use your name, how you could use your name or title or reference your position on your social media account, and that was something that really sparked that conversation at OGE.
So I hate to cut things short. It seems like we're doing that a lot with our interviews. We're just having so many good interviews today. But we need to cut this short because we're getting ready to start our next session on 2635.502. For those of you who are out there listening to us and watching us virtually, we hope that you enjoy this session. And Chris, thanks so much for joining us here in the booth.
Absolutely, and I hope everybody tunes in tomorrow.
Thanks, Chris.
Thanks, Chris.
Session of the day. You're all wide awake. None of you have caffeine with you. So we're going to try something here to keep you awake. This is going to be a participatory session. I was just in a session on 205, 203, and whenever the people ask a question, everyone just sat there. We're not giving you that option. We are going to have, Walt brags about this being a cost-effective summit. So this is our electronic voting system. We paid a lot for this. So we're going to be running through some hypotheticals. And one thing I noticed is no ethics officials, we're all a cautious lot, no one wants to get the answer wrong. And if you don't want to get an answer wrong, you really shouldn't have become an ethics official. But because these are hard questions, and it's sometimes these questions can be tricky. So, we're going to handle some tricky questions, and we're going to ask you a yes or no question. Now, we'll tell you whether red means yes or no. That's actually not as easy as you think. It gets a little confusing. And at the end of the question, we're going to ask you what you think. And if the answer is yes, or the answer is you can't do it, or it's a 502 problem, you're going to hold up your red sheet of paper. Now, if you've got your program with you, you hold up the red sheet of paper like this. And nobody but me knows how you voted. And then I'll tell, unless you turn around and look, in which case you're just kind of being a little nerdy and you're not playing the game the way we're supposed to play this. So don't do that. We'll tell you. So if the answer is no, you hold up a red sheet of paper. If the answer is yes, you can still remain anonymous by putting your red sheet of paper in the book and holding up a green sheet of paper. Okay? You'll notice I did not give you a yellow sheet of paper. There's a reason. We considered that, and we concluded that we'd see nothing but yellow every time we ask a question. So you're going to have to answer these questions, and then we'll tell the audience and we'll tell the people out who are watching this on streaming what it looks like, whether most people are red or most people are green. If you are watching this on streaming, get yourself a red and yellow, green piece of paper, or name your hands or something. You'll get more out of this if you participate as well. So, before we get to the polling mechanisms we've set up, Monica is going to give you an introduction to 502. That's what we're here for, and then we'll get into the scenarios. Okay. Actually, let me also introduce Tina Heimer from the Department of Energy. They have lots of 502 questions in the Department of Energy, and so she's our expert, and I'm just going to be the color man. So.
Okay, so I'm going to start with a brief overview of 502, which focuses on the personal and business relationships of an employee. We're looking at how these relationships may affect impartiality and the steps that can be taken to ensure that the decision-making process is free of any bias or even the appearance of bias. This presentation assumes that you have at least a basic understanding of 502. However, if you don't and you'd like to learn more about this topic, there are a number of resources available online through our Institute for Ethics in Government. So first I want to talk about the purpose of the impartiality regulations. These help ensure that an employee takes appropriate steps to avoid an appearance of a loss of impartiality in performing his or her official duties. So in other words, they're designed to prevent the introduction of bias into the decision-making process. These biases often arise out of a sense of loyalty, and through the impartiality regulations, we want to make sure that employees are serving the government's best interest. We also want the public to be able to trust the outcome of the decision-making process. Because in a larger sense, the purpose of these regulations is to protect the reputational integrity of the agency and the federal government in general. Remember always that the agency is your client, and when we think about the impartiality regulations, we're thinking about the reputational risk to the agency. And as we discuss the specifics of the regulation, we should remember not to lose sight of the reasons for why we have these rules in place. I'd also like to note that while we're going to be discussing 502 today, there's another impartiality provision which deals with extraordinary payments from former employers, and that's 503. There's going to be a session on Thursday that addresses that topic. So most of you should be familiar with the requirements of 502, which I've summarized here. Where an employee knows that a particular matter involving specific parties is likely to have a direct and predictable effect on the financial interest of a household member, or a person with whom the employee has a covered relationship is or represents a party to such matter, and where the employee determines that a reasonable person with knowledge of the relevant facts would question the employee's impartiality in the matter, the employee should not participate, absent a determination from the agency designee. So in this brief overview, the concepts that I'm going to be highlighting are the decision makers when it comes to impartiality determinations, particular matters involving specific parties, financial interest of a household member, covered relationships, the reasonable person standard, and the determination of the agency designee. So to begin with, who are the players that get to make decisions as to whether there's a lack of impartiality? So most importantly, it's the employee who gets to take the first bite at the apple regarding whether a reasonable person would question their impartiality. However, the decision-making does not end with the employee. Supervisors also have a role of weighing in on the appropriateness of having a particular employee participate. In addition, they always have the option of assigning the work to another employee. They're not required to point to 502 if they think it would be more appropriate to have someone else do the work instead. And the agency designee, of course, has a role too. This is the person who makes the determination as to whether an employee's impartiality would indeed be questioned and can authorize the employee to participate. This person is often the ethics official, although per our definition at 2635-102B, it's not always the agency ethics official. It could be a supervisor, for example, and this is going to be an agency determination. So next we move on to particular matters involving specific parties. So as you may recall, in our universe of matters, we have particular matters. And whereas a matter may include a broad policy determination, particular matters are more narrowly focused. And there are two types of particular matters. The first type, particular matters of general applicability, are focused on the interests of a discrete and identifiable class, but not specific parties. 502 instead is concerned with the second type, particular matters involving specific parties. These have named parties and include, for example, grants, contracts, licensing, litigation, and so forth. Next, what are the types of scenarios that employees should be watching out for? 502 contains two separate and very different provisions. For the first provision, we're looking at whether a particular matter involving specific parties is likely to have a direct and predictable effect on the financial interest of a member of the employee's household. Note that this is limited to the employee's household. So who is a household member? It could be a spouse, it could be children living at home, a parent who may be living with you, but it doesn't have to be a blood relative. It could be, for example, a roommate or a live-in boyfriend or girlfriend. However, it is not a brief visitor. But keep in mind here that 208 is going to prevail in the case of the financial interest of a spouse or minor child. We need to remember to think about whether there are any 208 concerns because 208 has criminal implications. We can't just jump directly into 502. Now, the second provision, and the one that we generally think of when we look at 502, involves covered relationships. Here, again, we're concerned with particular matters involving specific parties. And we're looking at whether the person whom the employee has a covered relationship with is or represents a party. So note that while the last provision dealt with direct and predictable, this one does not. So with a covered relationship, we're looking at mere involvement in the particular matter, either as a party or representing a party. We're not interested in the financial interests of the covered relationships. So who do employees have a covered relationship with? And these are gonna be very familiar. So it's a person other than a prospective employer with whom they have or seek a business, contractual, or other financial relationship that involves other than a routine consumer transaction. So for example, it could be the employee's attorney or CPA. Next, it's a member of the household or a relative with whom they have a close personal relationship. Perhaps it's an adult child living at home or a brother with whom they're close. It's also a person for whom they have within the last year served as an officer, director, trustee, general partner, agent, attorney, consultant, contractor, or employee. So for example, it could be the employer that they left 6 months ago. It's also an organization in which they're an active participant. So here we're looking at affiliations that are less than those captured by 208, such as serving as a trustee. But we're looking at something more than just showing up for an organization's meetings or something more than paying dues. And then finally, the last piece, an employee has a covered relationship with a person for whom the employee's spouse, parents, or dependent child is, to the employee's knowledge, serving or seeking to serve as an officer, director, trustee, and so forth. And as you can see, this is pretty wide-reaching. And we're not only looking at current positions, we're also looking at the ones that these family members are seeking. So it would include your spouse and your spouse's clients, but it would also include your mother and your mother's prospective employer. So here, the net is being cast pretty wide. And even though the net is cast wide, the realm of covered relationships still isn't the entire universe. As we said in the preamble to the final rule back in 1992, in pinpointing certain relationships that are especially likely to raise issues of a lack of impartiality, this section helps focus the employee's inquiry. So we know we didn't identify everything, and that's why we have the catch-all provision at 502A2. An employee who's concerned that circumstances other than those specifically described in this section would raise a question regarding his impartiality should use the process described in this section to determine whether he should or should not participate in a particular matter. So once the employee determines that either of these provisions applies, the employee must then ask whether a reasonable person with knowledge of the relevant facts would question the employee's impartiality. And this is where the optics of the situation are weighed. And we don't define what a reasonable person is in our regulation. The assumption, though, is that they have the relevant facts. So in other words, we're looking at the totality of the circumstances. However, what is not a consideration is the employee's reputation for honesty and integrity. That's not relevant to the determination. And keep in mind that it's not only the employee engaging in this analysis, it's also the agency designee. So again, we're weighing optics. We're still trying to make a reasonable judgment about where these affiliations create an optics problem for the agency. For example, just because you have a covered relationship, it does not mean that the circumstances are always going to be problematic. But the ultimate question is, of course, should the employee participate? And remember that the employee takes the first crack at this analysis, and admittedly, it's a rather technical analysis. But what we really want employees to be able to take away is this. Are they concerned that their impartiality might be questioned? If so, they should stop and seek guidance from an agency designee. The agency designee then conducts their own analysis. And although the process is usually initiated by the employee, it can be done on the designee's own initiative or upon request. Perhaps a supervisor makes the request. So the agency designee then makes an independent determination using the reasonable person standard. And again, we're looking at the totality of the circumstances. However, keep in mind that the agency designees have some discretion that they should exercise in order to protect the agency. Again, the agency is the client here. So one possible outcome is that the agency designee determines that impartiality would not be questioned, in which case it would be proper for the employee to participate in the matter. Another outcome is that the agency designee determines that the employee's impartiality would be questioned, and in which case it would not be proper for the employee to participate in the matter. Finally, even if the agency designee determines that the employee's impartiality would be questioned, the agency designee may still authorize participation if the government's interest in having the employee participate outweighs the concern that a reasonable person would question the integrity of the agency's programs and operations. Now, keep in mind that no employee has a right to participate in a particular matter. This is a management prerogative. At the end of the day, the agency does not relinquish its managerial discretion. It just may not be in the agency's interest for the employee to participate. And so with that brief overview, we're now going to move on to the discussion questions. And as we look at some of these scenarios, keep in mind that there really is no bright line test for whether an employee should participate. The decision is going to vary from agency to agency. It's a risk assessment that the agency designee engages in for the agency.
Okay, so what should be obvious from this is there's just a whole heck of a lot of people or a whole lot of relationships that employees could have that could cause people to question their impartiality. And as we see, there's a lot of technical questions here. I think the takeaway for the employees, in training employees, it's if you think someone might question your impartiality, you don't have to go through all this analysis of 502. If you think there's something out there that might cause someone to question your impartiality, go talk to your ethics advisor if you think a reasonable person might question your impartiality. Now, what's a reasonable person? For your political appointees, we actually have a definition for that. A reasonable person is the head of your oversight committee who doesn't like you. So, that doesn't mean that you can't do things. It just means there's someone out there, it's hard to imagine, but there's someone out there that doesn't like you or doesn't like your party, and don't hand them ammunition to hurt you with. So if you have a question about this, come and see us. Now, for the rest of these questions, the person has come and seen us. So we're assuming a good scenario here. In most of these case studies we're going to have, the person has come and seen us. And so our first example is the one you're most likely to see, especially during the transition. And that is covered relationships with former employers, right? Because you got all these people coming from former employers, and they're going to have a bunch of questions about what can they do relating to their former employer. So, we still have, yes. So, if hypothetically you worked for the Environmental Protection Agency, okay, so your environmental protection person is a former natural gas executive, and the department is currently drafting fracking regulations. Can the person, using a 502 analysis now, can the person work on those fracking regulations? Hold up red for no, green for yes. Yes. Nope. We will get. We will. It's good to know, but you caught how I answered that question. Under 502, can the person work on the fracking regulation? I'm seeing mostly greens and a few reds. And one question. He's going to have input on it, and he might be the decision maker. So I think it is not a problem under 502. Why isn't it a 502 problem? It's not a party matter. No, yeah, that's right. If you had a regulation that prohibited American Airlines from flying that, but no, this is, by its terms, it applies to anyone who's fracking.
Right.
Okay. Should the person question, or should the person, are people going to question his impartiality if he works on this? You betcha. Red for yes. Who's going to question his impartiality? Anyone who doesn't like his decision. All right. Now, this question. As ethics officials, are you going to what are you going to advise him? Should he work on this or not? Okay. It's a management call, that's right. It's completely a management call, and I think as an ethics official, you would come in, well, the manager can always say, I don't want you working on this. I mean, now, as ethics official, I think we have to recognize elections have consequences. You elected a president who appointed a natural gas executive to make policy decisions at the EPA. That's the decision the president made. And so normally you're going to say, we're not going to use the ethics rules to overcome the decision the president made. Now, should you warn the person that he might be subject to some criticism for this? Sure, and management could make the call that in order to avoid that fight, they're not going to assign him, but certainly under a 502 analysis, it wouldn't be prohibited. And generally, I discourage ethics officials from using 502 to prevent people from engaging in policy matters where they already have an inclination. Just turn it around. EPA had a director during the Clinton administration who was from the where was Carol Bronner from? But the Environmental Defense Fund. I mean, a former employee of the Environmental Defense Fund became director of EPA. That doesn't mean she can't work on things that the Environmental Defense Fund took action on. That's the decision of the president who to appoint. Okay. So we're going to change the scenario a little bit. Same question, working for the EPA. What if there's a company, his former company comes up and wants a permit? Can he participate in that, or should he recuse? Lots of reds. Lots of reds. And why are you saying red? It's a party matter, so it is 502. And then the next question is, would someone question his impartiality? And the judgment most of you made is yes. There were a couple greens. Does anyone want to argue that point? I mean, feel free, but no, I think most of us would say he should recuse in that case. Now, even in a recusal case, right, I mean, if there was absolutely no one else who could do it, you could make the decision to authorize him to do that, not a career-enhancing one, but you know, that's still in the realm. Okay. The former company wants to get a permit, but it's 25 months after he leaves. Do we have a 502 issue? After he left the former company. Do we have a 502 issue? No. It's a 1-year prohibition with the pledge. It's a 2-year prohibition. Would you advise him to participate in the permitting process? Red for no, green for yes. Let's see some votes. Yeah, pretty even split, a little heavier on red. And I think the reason comes there, and I think the reason you might be inclined to do red there is, what's the problem with letting someone else do it? Again, if he was the head of the department and it was his responsibility and it was not easy to move that around, but this is part of the management decisions that you make, which is, I don't need the aggravation. Joe can do it as well as Fred can. Joe, you approve this permit. Fred, you take this one. Now, my EPA people are shaking their heads in disgust at me. You're green, right? Well, I said, so. Again, clearly under 502, the person's not prohibited from doing it. If the person did it without coming to you, and someone asks you, did he break the rule? The answer to that is clearly no, he didn't break the rule. Indeed, because EPA has a supplemental regulation that says you can't do anything without asking Justine first. I didn't know we approved that one. And that's a very good point. We have, and if we're talking about violations of the rule, this is the reason that some people hate 502 and some people like 502. I'm in the like category. This is, these are considerations that employees are supposed to take. If an employee in this situation, in the permit situation, let's say it was within a year, said, look, it's a permit. You either meet the requirements of the permit or you don't meet the requirements of the permit. I'm not worried. If you're questioning my impartiality, you're not questioning in good faith. And therefore, I participated. And you as ethics officials say, I wouldn't have suggested that. I think that was a bad call. The person has not violated 502. He made a good faith call, or she made a good faith call that 502 allows the person to make. Now, if it comes to your attention, you can tell them not to do it. And of course, if the person's a political person or even a senior person, if that was just abhorrent judgment, that may well be reflected in the person's performance appraisal or in the other kind of assignments he gets. But that's a really good point. 502, it's very hard. We don't second guess employees under 502. 502, but we advise people to seek guidance, not because they might violate 502 if they don't, but because they're going to hurt the agency if they don't, and they're there to serve the agency.
Hey, Dave, Can I ask you a question?
Is it a hard one?
Sure. Are any of them easy? So what if that, let's stay with that same example, but let's say that this is we know permitting applications can sometimes drag on for years. What if that employee had worked on that same permit and it was 25 months now after they have already left?
So they worked on the permit?
When they were at the natural gas company, they left the company, it's 25 months later, they're working at EPA.
And they're being asked to improve?
No.
No, not a lawyer, and he's being asked to permit.
Let's say a program person.
And he's being asked whether he can approve the permit that he submitted to the agency before he left his.
Or he worked on for his company at the time, his former company.
What do people think? Good idea, bad, or 502 or not 502? Not 502, good idea, bad idea? Red is bad idea. Not prudent. All right. So we are all aware of the standard we frequently give, and depending on who we're giving this advice to, we temper it, but legally permissible, but stupid. And, you know, we all have situations like that, and I think most of you would agree that fits into the legally permissible but stupid category, and we try to avoid our people doing that. Okay. Any other hard questions?
That's it for right now. I'm sure I'll have more.
Let's move on. Okay. So, an IRS employee is a member of a private organization whose purpose is to restore a local you know what, I'm going to let you guys read this. Everyone can read that? No? Okay, I'll read it. An IRS employee is a member of a private organization whose purpose is to restore a local historic movie theater. Let's call it the state. While she's an outspoken advocate for the organization, particularly on social media, she has no formal duties or activities. She simply is a dues-paying member who tweets a lot. A tweeting do pair. As an IRS employee, she's been assigned to participate in a determination regarding the employee's recent application for tax-exempt status. Is this a 502 problem? Yes for red, no for green. About half and half. How about a green person? Why wouldn't it be a 502 situation? Mere membership. I'm sorry? Outspoken advocate. For example, you're a passionate believer in your position. There's nothing, and maybe had we written this regulation in the age of tweeting, we would have thought of this. We didn't, and maybe we need to address it in our next social, but I think outspoken advocate is not what we would normally call anything more than an active participant. I think we would not treat it as a 502. Yes? Right. Well, let's be clear here. No one is suggesting that this person cannot be an outspoken advocate. The question is, if she's an outspoken advocate, should she be working on the tax-exempt status of this organization? How many think she should recuse herself from the tax-exempt status issue? Oh, sorry. Green to recuse.
I'm sorry.
No. Red to recuse.
Red to recuse.
Generally, red means stop, and this is where it gets confusing because often yes means stop, and that's why we had to put these. I get so confused. At any rate, red means recuse. Green means go ahead and work on it. Mostly red. Some greens. Anyone want to argue their position? A green person? That was the EPA example. No. Yeah, it's a judgment call whether she should work on it or not. I would think that normally, I probably, as the ethics advisor, the question I would ask the supervisor is there a reason you want her to work on this? Is it, can you just assign that to someone else? If there was a reason, then I might let her work on it, or if there wasn't someone else who could work on it, I might let her work on it, or I might let her work on it if, again, this was, hearkening back, this was a pretty ministerial determination. Because the more ministerial the determination, the less likely it is that someone's going to question the impartiality. I would be worried about impartiality personally. I could be talked out of it. So how's that for making everyone happy? Actually, let me go here first and I'll come back to you. Yeah, sure. The question is, would it matter to me whether she was actually making the determination or just making a recommendation? I think that's a very relevant consideration in determining whether her impartiality would be questioned. Yeah, and obviously the more she was the final decision maker, the more careful you're going to be. Right. If it got to a 502D, some people talk like that, but if it got to the agency authorization, then it would be a good idea to document it if you could do that. Now, 502D is the factors that the regs say you consider in determining whether someone participates or not. I always thought that was a little bit artificial because it's also the factors they're going to be considering in making their own judgment as whether a reasonable person would question their impartiality. But if you can train your employees, and here again, getting back to employee training, if you can train your employees, the answer is if something's bothering you, come see me, then you can move right to the 502D determination.
And I'm just going to I'm going to chime in here from the agency perspective, and I'm sure a lot of you feel the same way. I don't want our employees to self-lawyer either, because that's when they get themselves in trouble. Because of course they're never going to question their impartiality. I work at a department where we have a lot of scientists and engineers, and a lot of them, they truly believe in the science and engineering work that they're doing, and they are doing incredible work on all of these scientists and engineers across the government, all employees for that matter. But you sometimes have to take a step back. And so I think that our job is really to highlight what the rule is and when there may or may not be an issue and when they should contact us. And so, and especially in the context of, with respect to transition, in the earlier examples about former employers, we really want to educate management so that they know what to look for and they know when to come to you all and get advice and consideration so that you can, help walk them through it earlier as opposed to later when, there is something in front of, the employee involving their former employer. Right. My 2 cents.
Yeah, particularly you're right, in the new employees at the beginning of administration, these people are coming in and they're there to do good things, right? I mean, and so it doesn't occur to them that people would question them doing good things. And after about 6 months, they realize that people question everything they do. But especially in that early stages, it's really important to get them to come and talk to you. Plus, it's kind of nice. You get to know them and learn about their families. I think we already, is there anything else the employee should do? Yeah, they should talk to you or talk to their manager. Their self-lawyering is one, depending on how many ethics officials you have in your agency, sometimes, as Monica said, the manager sometimes acts as the ethics official as well, which is in this particular case, if she went to her supervisor and said, I've been an active, outspoken person, and the supervisor said, well, I think you can work on it. That would give her some comfort or him some comfort. If they were still uncomfortable, they could kind of up it to the ethics official. But frequently, a lot of these will be resolved in a day-to-day world without coming to you. They'll go to their supervisor. They should that should be pretty much a no-brainer, right? Which is someone assigned you work and you're worried that it might be detrimental to the agency for you to do it. Well, talk to the person who assigned you the work and see whether that person agrees with you. Okay, so those are two of the most common things we see with 502, the former employer, the outside organization, and the final one is, yes, matrimonial blisses, spouse-client problems or spouse-employers. These come up a lot, and they'll come up very much in a transition. So, an employee's spouse works at a law firm that represents many Fortune 500 clients on tax matters. And she represents many of these folks. May the employee work on a contract with the agency has with one of the spouse's clients. So let's just...
Let's assume she's not a partner at the law firm, too.
Okay. Okay. An employee's spouse. Okay, the government employee has a spouse who's a lawyer and not a partner. Well, yeah, not a partner. Yeah. Not a partner, just working at the law firm, although I'm not sure partner matters here, because of the facts here. And the law firm represents, and she represents a client on a tax matter. She represents ABC Corporation on a tax matter. ABC Corporation has a contract to provide support services to the agency. Okay? Should she work on that matter? What was the matter I gave? Oh, the contract. The contract. Yeah. Okay, what do we see out there? We see some mostly reds, some greens. I think this is a fairly hard one, and I think it would be fairly fact specific. It's a client on something wholly unrelated to the matter they're working on. She's not a partner. On the other hand, I did say it was a contract, so it is a party matter. Certainly if it was not, yeah. And I've seen this, and I've gone both ways on this one, depending on the, she laughs at me. I'm using judgment. I've gone both ways on these, and what are some of the things, I mean, we've got a split audience on this. What are some of the things that would cause you to say, don't work on it? No, she's representing the client on a completely different matter. Yeah, that's why it was a tax matter. She's representing the client on a completely different matter. Yeah. Possible. It's a bit of a stretch, I think, for direct and predictable, certainly under because that would put us right into 208 land. And that would be serious indeed, especially if it was a partner. Normally, I don't go to 208 in those situations because it seems unlikely that even the payment of the contract would have a direct and predictable effect on the company's ability to pay an unrelated debt. Possible, but I normally wouldn't call that direct and predictable. But I do think you're right. If the significance of the matter to the contractor, to the client, is one of the factors that would determine that. Anything else you might be concerned about?
I think we had something right over here.
I'm going to go back, Dave, to something you said at the very beginning of the session, which I think
You can't do it.
you got to take your reasonable person standard as the hospital person on the oversight committee. I sometimes, when I'm doing the training, talk about above the fold Washington Post kind of story, right? And so I think a lot of it will depend on what your agency does, who you are, and I think for me, this would be an easy red, no way. Like, not, I say juice is not worth the squeeze.
You'd say what? Juice isn't worth the squeeze. I thought people should hear that. The juice is not worth the squeeze. Just a minute. That's a good one.
Good
Yeah. Right, it would be under 502. I mean, the partner creates the possibility of a 208. Not usually, because they don't, what you do on that contract is usually not going to have a direct and predictable effect, because the firm isn't representing them on that contract. If the firm was representing them on the contract, then what you do on the contract would probably have a direct and predictable effect on the firm. It is not unusual for us to see 502 language in ethics agreements in this kind of situation. And frequently you do have just you can't do it, although usually there's an escape clause in that, right, which is without talking to my ethics official. It would depend, I think the significance of the matter would depend how big a corporation it is, and again, as always, how important it is for the agency to work on this. I had a case once where let's see. Yeah, I guess it wasn't a party. I don't remember why I got to be a part, but someone was working on a really important project, and that person's spouse worked for a law firm. Yeah, was employed by the law firm, so it was a spouse employment thing, but was the IT person for the law firm. And the law firm was representing someone on an entirely different thing, which she had the expertise on, and she had done all the work on. Could she continue to work on it? And I authorized that in that case. I didn't see that causing people to question the impartiality. All right, so yes.
I'm sorry. I was just going to chime in here too, because we see this frequently as well, especially I'm like many of you, we have sites all across the country, and some of them in really remote areas. But also, too, we have our Department of Energy manages national labs, and I'm going to pick on Sandia National Lab in particular because Lockheed Martin is the contractor. Lockheed Martin does many different things besides just managing a national lab. And so we'll look at if we have a spouse who works for Lockheed Martin, and that the federal employee has responsibilities related maybe to that particular Sandia National Lab, we'll look at like the nature of the work that they're doing, where their spouse works. Their spouse could work in a completely different division that was unrelated to, government contracts, period. Maybe like in the airplane division or something like along those lines. So we do see this frequently. We see it also frequently in our remote locations where the Department of Energy is the primary employer. And so we really do have to kind of weigh the agency's interest in having the person continue to participate in the matter versus having it reassigned, because in some of these more remote locations, we might not have that ability to reassign it to somebody. So we look at how we can minimize the risk, but still allow them to participate in the matter.
Right. We had a situation when I was in the Army. We ran Kwajalein Missile Range, which was in the Marshall Islands, which they're actually in the news right now. But the Air Force would shoot missiles at our islands, and we tried to shoot them, and it was real great fun. Kwajalein Missile Range was a 1/4 mile wide and 2 miles long, and we had a contractor out there that did all our support services. Actually, that's a bad example. Yeah, your Sandia example is a lot better. But this we're not even going to go there. This was before we had to clear 208 waivers with OGE. But at any rate, this will come up where you have a large contract that a lot of people in the agency are working at. Essentially, you're going to have to disqualify the person from working in your agency if her spouse or his spouse works for the contractor in another area. It's really harsh, even if they worked on the same contract, which was my situation. Then you've got a 208 problem, although a very kind of technical one where we probably, you might want to think about asking us for a waiver, and we might want to think about saying yes. Yes? Well, I think that was the example you had. The spouse was actually an employee of Lockheed Martin in that case. But yes, if in the lawyer case, sure, the bigger the client is, the more weight you'd give before authorizing participation. Okay, so now we've done the easy ones. Let's go to friendship. Friendship is good. So, okay, red if you think friendship is bad. No. Okay, 2 employees are good friends. This is going to come up. 2 employees are good friends with each other. In fact, their families frequently socialize outside the office. One of them has been promoted to head the office that both of them work in. Is this a 502 problem? Red for yes, green for no. Mostly green. It's a bit of a trick question. Anyone want to, friend is not one of the things highlighted in 502. Is there a reason someone wants to argue that it should be considered 502? That's different. I wouldn't want to work for my friend. Let me clarify your point. She says, I wouldn't want to work in the office. Are you the friend or someone else? Yep. Okay, that makes sense then. There's another aspect which is, I don't think it gets you 502, but we do in the misuse of position section talk about not taking, involving yourselves in actions that will affect a friend. But generally, we don't treat friendship as a 502. It's just too hard to define, and it really could get ugly. Okay, so these guys are good friends. Does one, okay, it's not a 502, we said, because friendship's not a 502. Nonetheless, you might have someone in the office who says, I don't want to work in this office, or one of the people's a friend with the other. Should one of the employees be reassigned? How many of you would try to reassign one of the employees? Yeah, green for, red for reassign, green for don't reassign. Red for reassign. I know, that was a very confusing question. Mostly green, and I think the reason for that is reassignment's actually a pretty harsh thing to do. Neither one of these people have done anything wrong. Is there something that, what advice would you give either of these employees if they came to you and said, we're a little worried about this? Any advice you'd give? Yeah, don't have lunch together all the time. That's going to increase visibility, likely raise more questions. Mm-hmm. Yeah, gifts between employees could come up. Right, I think that's a really good idea, which is if you do take personnel actions, maybe you can structure the personnel actions like you have, maybe you didn't do this before, but do it now, which is once you recommend bonuses, have another official in the agency review those to see if those look reasonable to them. Just
If you have that ability.
if you have that ability. OGE has gone both ways on that. Generally, we've discouraged subordinates doing it. As a practical matter, that frequently is the only person who can. If I were the manager, I'd make the decision on whether to go up or down as to whether I thought going up, the person going up had enough knowledge to reasonably evaluate them. So yeah, I think you take some precautions because I think the possibility of complaining is certainly here.
Mm-hmm. Can I throw a wrinkle into this?
I would expect nothing less.
Okay, so let's change it. So we're not dealing with two federal employees, one who gets promoted, but let's just say the matter involves your girlfriend or boyfriend who you don't live with, but maybe you're in a long-term relationship with them, or a fiance that you do not live with.
Well, do you think anyone's going to question your impartiality if you provide a... Where's the romance? Where's the...
So harsh.
Did you guys... I mean, didn't you ever watch Cheers? I mean, no,
Yes.
You're... So, romance. So... Mm-hmm. Okay, let's just see if we can, how many would want the boyfriend to recuse from evaluating his girlfriend? That's red. For Valentine's Day. Yeah, mostly red there.
Yeah.
Okay. I forget, are you doing this?
No, I think you were.
I'm
But
still...
I'll also add, we've seen this come up too in the context where maybe the girlfriend or the boyfriend was a contractor or employee. And, you know, I kind of like to throw the the provision where it says the employee, something doesn't fall within the definition of covered relationship, but where the employee believes a reasonable person would question their impartiality, I kind of like to throw that one back in their face a little bit, like, well, you wouldn't have come to me if you didn't think that there was a problem or that you were concerned. And so I kind of use that to help kind of suggest that it might be more appropriate that they not participate in something, especially if it is relating to a contracting matter, because my procurement friends would always tell me, you have to be extremely above board when it comes to procurement, because the procurement rules are not necessarily, you have the ethics rules, but then there's procurement rules too that are above and beyond just our basics, ethics standards and statutes.
Right. And beyond the procurement rules, contracts can be challenged.
Oh, absolutely.
So it's like, even if it's not going to, when you're involving procurement, there's a whole nother analysis. And I'm not a procurement expert, but I've seen some ALJ cases where, I had an ALJ case when I was at the Department of Labor where a guy voided a contract because one of the contracting officers had accepted a jar of homemade borscht. So you just be really, you can't
be careful enough sometimes. And
well, yeah, I mean, you can't preclude all the borscht judges out there, but just recognize that they're out there, and you have to be careful about, and that should be part of your equation. I would just note that we probably shouldn't use, well, if you came to me, the answer is no because you were concerned about it. That's gonna. I'm a little worried about the predictable result.
Well,
of that.
yes.
But yes.
But you came to us, you're clearly concerned, so let's talk about the facts.
Let's talk about it, right.
Right.
Let me go to Sandy. Oh, that's right. If you have a fiance, if you have a gift, right. If it's yeah. One of the most, we're getting into the absolute worst public disclosure question you can have, right? Because I don't want my mom to know that my friend paid for our trip to Hawaii. Because I don't want my mom to know I went to Hawaii. But that's a problem. Yeah. Right. Now we can quibble over whether they're whether that's protecting or not. But yeah, I mean you're adding another thing to the procurement. So yeah, in the procurement area, err really on the side of we got a new definition of a reasonable person. It's the person who didn't get the contract and is really mad.
Right.
If they're you definitely don't want to give them ammunition because they'll use it. Okay. All right, where are we? Bam. Yes. Going to, all right. Oh, this one's fun. Do we change it? Yes. Okay. A defense contract audit. We got an auditor here. Okay, the defense contract audit agency employees assigned to audit a government contract that another DoD agency has with company XYZ. This is a weird fact situation, as opposed to the other ones I've given you. The employee's spouse was the project manager for the DoD agency. So the spouse is a government employee on the contract that he is going to be auditing, but is not otherwise involved in the matter. So she's the spouse is the project manager on the project that the person, the DCAA person is going to audit. Do we have a 502 issue? Yes is red, green is no. Wow, it's right. It seems so wrong. But you're right, we don't have a 502 issue because it's another government agency and she's acting as a government employee. And this is one of the points I think that's important in this presentation. Sometimes you have to use the Bill Murray rule here, which is just doesn't matter whether it's a 502 issue or not. This is going to look really bad. Oh, I gave away my answer to the next question. Should the employee be recused from participating in this matter? Oh, no one's going to hold up green just to make me feel bad? Right, no, this is a terrible idea. No, he shouldn't be auditing. Any other concerns here? Yeah, we're going to have concerns whether, he's going to have concerns whether he reports it to the IG or not, right? Yeah, it's a situation you don't want to put yourself in, and your impartiality is going to be questioned. Now, audit in a DoD audit agency that one's pretty clear, right? Someone else should do that audit. But this is not a completely ridiculous situation. For if you're at the State Department or DoD, more likely the State Department or USAID or Department of Agriculture, you may have situations where you have spouses both assigned to the same office, and they are going to interact in their official duties. And sometimes that's inevitable. In the past, OGE has cautioned people that if you take action, for example, if your spouse has a project she's working on and you are in a position to approve or disapprove or sign off on that project, that might raise a 208 concern because that might affect her promotion possibility. That is not the position we're taking anymore. You recognize, but I think even though it's not a 502, I think 502 is the better way to analyze these kind of situations. And that is someone going to question the impartiality of the person doing the work? And if so, is there someone else who can do the work? Sometimes there isn't. I mean, my wife worked at the same agency I did for a while, and it was not, and I was the only ethics official. You know, they said you did enough damage by yourself, Paul? But so I was the only ethics official, and occasionally one of her employees would come to me and say, do I have to recuse myself from this matter? And I'd say yes or no. Well, my wife didn't want the people to be recused from the matter, right? No manager wants their people recused from the matter. So I was adversely affecting her ability to some degree to get her job done. I never felt compelled to turn myself into the Justice Department for that. That's not a 208. You know, if I could have avoided it, I would have. I couldn't. I didn't. This one's because sometimes employees do have to work together, or spouse, and I think the right analysis when you have that situation is do a 502 type analysis of that. Should be avoided when it can be. If it can't be, then you do an authorization. Yes, ma'am. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Right. The question is, you've got two people working together in the office. One leaves the office. They remain friends. That person comes back to the office representing a client. Should the person recuse himself from his friend's activity or from the matter in which the friend is represented? I think that's not a 502. And I think the answer to that will be, my suggestion to him is, the first thing I'd do is go talk to my supervisor and say, look, just so you know, I'm a good friend with this person. And then you'd probably say something, and I think this is a controversial case and could be acrimonious, so I think I probably ought not work on it. Or you might say, it's a bright line case. I don't think there's any controversy here. I think I can work on it, but just wanted you to know. you can assign someone else to it or not. Okay? All right. I forget which ones I got one more? Oh,
10 minutes.
and 10 minutes. Okay, let's, just a minute, we're going to conclave here. Which one should we do? Should we do this
That
one, or should we go to the employee determination? Family member, I think this one's relatively, you want to do that? That
You want to
one's-
do that one instead?
Yep. Let's,
Okay.
okay, we are going to do this
Okay.
one. Okay. We're running out of time. We're just having too much fun here. A senior federal employee's brother is an executive at a corporation that's affected by a regulation issued by the senior employee's agency. Should the employee be recused from working on policy matters affecting that corporation? Red is recused, green is he doesn't have to be recused. Yeah, certainly under 502 he doesn't need to be recused. I see a few reds out there. Normally we don't recuse people in that circumstances. It's up to the agency, of course, but that's pretty, we use 208. It's clearly not 208. It's not 502. I probably would not go with a recusal. Again, if the person, never a bad idea to check with someone. All right. And the regulation, right, is it's clearly not a 502 because the regulation is not a party matter. Okay. Now, there's a meeting at the agency to discuss this regulation. And the employee and brother was representing the company at that meeting. First question, do we have a 502 situation here? Green is no, red is yes. No, it's a
Regulation.
it's a meeting to discuss the regulation. Yes, I didn't answer your question. No, it's a regulation that applies to the industry. Okay, is it a 502? It's not a 502 because it's not a party matter. Some of you are holding up red because OG has kind of gone back and forth on this. Under the pledge, we say meetings are party matters in and of themselves. But we look at what's the subject matter of the meeting to determine whether a meeting's a party matter. A little tricky because under the pledge, we treat meetings as party matters, but not under 502. Okay?
Walt?
Oh, certainly. Certainly. We're going to keep going.
Actually,
Okay?
was
Yes, did you want to?
oh, the question was whether or not you could analyze this under A2, or the comment, I should say.
Yes. So, right. So could this be analyzed under A2? And that's the next question. Actually, did I lose the question? Oh, yes. So the question was it 502? The next question, the one that's on the screen, is should the brother be recused from working on this matter or not? Should the person be sitting across the table from his brother at this meeting? Red is no, he ought not be sitting across from the table from his brother. Okay. Yeah, most of you, all of you say, this guy should be recused, and I agree, and the director agrees, which is good. It's good to be there. Yes, ma'am. Good point. I should be saying, is this a 502 relationship? You're right. That's what I mean by that. So, good point. It's a 502 issue if you should use A2 to do it. Indeed, it's still not a party matter, so it's not a 502 defined. But yes, under 502, should you be using the impartiality standard? So it's not a party matter. So, and I think, actually, now I have to go back and look, which I should. At any rate, we had a situation where sometimes, and the point of this one is, don't get yourself too wrapped up, and we've said this a couple times now, too wrapped around the axle on whether it meets the definition of 502 or not. In this particular case, the person said, this is not a 502. It's not even a party matter, and so 502 does not apply. But nothing, and Monica said this, and it's a very important point. There is absolutely nothing that says an agency has to assign someone to a matter that they think will look bad. So even if you didn't get to 502, the agency has the right to use their judgment and say, you're kidding, right? No, you can't sit across from your brother at that meeting. So that's, now, there's one thing I would, let's just stop. The point there is that management always has the right to assign work. And this would be a very bad case to assign this work to the person, and a very good case to tell the person to get off. Now, if the person hadn't brought this to your attention, he would not be in violation of 502. And actually, right, and this is a little tricky one, the agency doesn't have the right to impose 502A2. That actually says where the employee is concerned, he may do this. That's why it doesn't fit under 502. This employee was adamant and said, I do not think this would cause someone to question my impartiality because my brother works for a really good company. He didn't quite say that, but and actually the ethics office gave him the advice that this was not a 502 issue, and it really didn't because the employee was being there. But nonetheless, management has the right to say, no, we're not going to do something stupid. Or they can be a little more discreet than that. Okay. Are you up?
Are we doing the part with the contract? The brother now instead?
Okay.
The question that's up there?
Let's go to the next. Let's go to your first question. Was that your question?
I think we're showing them our.
Showing them our notes. Okay, I'll go to this one. Okay, we're running out of time, and I'm trying to senior employee's brother. Okay, what if the brother instead worked for a company that was competing for a contract with an agency? Well, yes, that's going to be a 502. That's a party matter, and he should not work on that matter. Okay.
Can I ask you, I'm going to substitute.
Okay.
What if it's your parent? Or what if it's your adult child who's just starting out of your house, independent, but just starting out early in their career?
Okay.
And maybe they're not participating, maybe it's their company.
Mm-hmm. So, this is one of the really strange things in 502. The 502 says that if your parent, it's your spouse or your parent works for a company that's a party, you're not supposed to participate. So then you have to do a 502 analysis if it's your parent working for it. But you ask another question, which was, what about your adult child who's just getting started on his job?
And it's their employer.
And it's their employer. But they're not representing. Right. It's really, the rule is written fairly strangely, and I need to go back and try to figure this out. I can't figure out why a parent is a bigger problem than an adult child.
We spent a lot of time talking about this, actually.
I mean, for me, my parents got a retirement plan or is well established in his job, is probably going to retire in a few years. My adult child has just started working for the company. And if he doesn't keep that job, he's coming back to live with me. I love my child dearly.
Thank Ellen.
Oh, you might inherit from the parent.
Point two.
Oh, there's a difference. Yeah, I'm not going to inherit from my kids. So there is that may be the rationale, because you might be inheriting your parents' wealth. Yeah, I personally have dissuaded my children of that. But okay, employee determination. Okay, was that yours?
Sure.
Okay, go for it.
All right. Okay, so the question is, an employee read through 2635-502, determined that her participation in a matter would be improper, recused from the matter, and was refusing to do work. The issue was raised to the ethics office, and the ethics office and the employee's supervisor believed participation would indeed be proper. The employee says that 502 notes only that she may seek guidance from an ethics official, not that she is required to do so. Can the employee be required to work on the matter? So green is yes, they should be required, right?
Yeah, green is the employee can be required, red is the employee cannot be required. Most of you are saying the employee can be required to work on the matter. What's something to consider here? Oh, I said, yes, I said it's up to the employee to decide initially whether 502 applies or not. And the employee in this case has come up and said, I've got a real concern about this. So the employees exercise their right, but upon looking at the matter, the supervisor and the agency decide that it's okay for the person to work on the matter. Let's face it, there are some matters out there that nobody wants to work on. And you can't just let employees do that. Now, I think it is a bit of you're taking somewhat of a risk by overruling the employee's concern, but sometimes you got to do it. Okay, well, we've run out of time. We aren't going to get to the alumni questions. The question is, could a Michigan grad ever fairly evaluate an Ohio State proposal? And the answer to that is yes, because the Ohio State shouldn't get anything.
So don't hire Dave to do your grant awarding or procurement awards.
I will notice the color of the OG program used to be blue and gold, and without my knowledge or permission, it was changed to green and white. I object strenuously to that, but at any rate, well, thank you for coming. I hope you had a good time, and this really was got you thinking about 502. It's been a lot of fun. And to quote Ferris Bueller, go home.
Welcome back. Well, that was an exciting end to the first day of the summit, wouldn't you say?
I would definitely say that, Liz. We had a number of very interesting presentations that we were able to live stream out to you, our virtual audience, throughout the course of the day. Just a couple of things real quick to wrap up before we call it for the day. Remember that tomorrow morning we'll start streaming at approximately 8:55 in the morning. We'll be in here providing you some information about the sessions that we'll have available throughout the day. Also, please note that at 9 o'clock in the morning, stream number 2 in room A here at the auditorium, or here at FHFA, will also be available. So just remember, get here just a little bit early, and we'll see you at the Institute for Ethics in Government's YouTube page.
And a couple quick thank yous for today. We'd like to thank all of the virtual attendees, of course, and our speakers and our interviewees today. And also, of course, none of this would have been possible without FHFA providing these wonderful facilities. So we are deeply thankful for that.
Very grateful. All right, so on behalf of OGE, I'm Ryan Segrist.
I'm Liz Horton.